In a world where justice fails, Mike, a man wrongfully convicted, faces the ultimate betrayal. His wife, Sandra, has not only abandoned him, but also conspired with his best friend, Steve, to shatter his life. As Mike battles for his innocence, he uncovers a web of lies, deceit, and heartbreak. Victoria, the prosecutor, begins to doubt her role, torn between duty and the haunting truth. Mike's once trusted family now revels in his downfall, leaving him isolated and desperate. With every twist, Mike's emotions spiral from despair to a burning desire for revenge. But when the truth finally emerges, can he ever reclaim the life he lost? Mike sat in silence, devastated, while the room erupted in celebration. The noise was overwhelming, and he felt completely detached from the joyous atmosphere. No one seemed to notice his pain. Instead, they seemed to revel in it. His hands shook as he remained slumped at the courtroom table, feeling the weight of his guilty verdict. His young lawyer, grinning and joining in the celebration, patted Mike's head and said, "Tough break, my friend," before walking away. The noise of cheers and laughter around him only deepened Mike's sense of isolation. He was afraid to look back at the crowd, fearing the cold stares of those he once trusted. The jury's guilty verdict echoed in his mind, especially the judge's remark that, were the death penalty an option, he would have considered it. Mike's future seemed bleak, 2 life sentences with no hope of freedom. Appeals felt pointless. No lawyer would touch his case given the severity of the crimes he'd been convicted of. Alone, hated, and betrayed, Mike buried his face in his hands and sobbed. Victoria Brown, the determined prosecutor who had meticulously dismantled his defense, suddenly approached him. Her expression had softened, a stark contrast to the ruthless demeanor she had shown throughout the trial. Kneeling beside him, she spoke gently, acknowledging the inappropriateness of the celebration and expressing regret over a colleague's rude remark. Surprised by her unexpected kindness, Mike listened as she asked if he had a message for anyone. After a moment of reflection, he shook his head. There was no one left who wanted to hear from him. That night changed everything. I thought back to my first meeting with Victoria Brown. She was professional, asking for my details and then my story. When I insisted on my innocence, she listened, even though I had no solid evidence against the real culprits, just the pain they'd caused me. In court, it felt like a battle lost. The media chaos around me, Victoria's stern demeanor, and the biased proceedings all pointed to my downfall. Yet she was the only one who asked if I really committed the crime, a question that earned her scorn. After the guilty verdict, as I sat defeated, Victoria looked concerned, but the guards pushed her aside and led me away. In the gallery, I saw movement. My daughter Matilda threw a balloon filled with red paint at me, yelling, "Murderer!" The crowd cheered as I was dragged out, already labeled Murder Mike. The media had decided my guilt before the trial even began. Accused of kidnapping and killing 2 sisters, I had no chance. The world wanted to see me pay, despite my pleas of innocence. As I was thrown into the police van, still covered in paint, I felt utterly hopeless. Victoria watched as I was taken away, disturbed by the celebration of my downfall. She returned to her desk, uneasy despite her success in convicting me. The case should have been her crowning achievement, locking away a dangerous criminal, but something felt off. The evidence, though damning, left lingering doubts. My insistence on innocence, the missing murder weapon, and my unsettling calmness troubled her. She had seen many criminals, but my eyes told a different story, one that didn't align with the guilt everyone else saw. But with Mike, from the moment I met him, something about his eyes bothered me. I didn't like that my job was to push for a conviction without really searching for the truth. My efforts to gather more evidence were wasted. No one wanted to help Mike prove he was innocent. For months, the stress and pressure to get a guilty verdict had been overwhelming. My bosses wanted nothing less than a life sentence for him, and the public defender assigned to Mike didn't seem to care much about his case. I had seen Mike in videos and met him in person several times, even after showing clear signs of distress while in custody. He kept insisting he was innocent. When I looked into his eyes again after the verdict, I was struck by what I saw. In that moment, those eyes didn't seem like the eyes of a murderer. They looked like the eyes of someone who had suffered. "You need to find both of them," those words echoed in my mind. Mike said in an interview that he had gotten out of his car and heard a young girl scream from the bushes. He ran toward the sound when he saw a flashlight flickering through the trees. He explained that just a few steps from where he was found near the girls, someone hit him in the back of the head and he fell down. When he woke up, he saw two people running back to their cars and heard the cries of Maisie and Tina lying in front of him. Experts said he probably hit his head while trying to help the girls, but they said he was guilty. Mike told us that when he reached the open area, he found the sisters barely alive. He said Maisie couldn't crawl to him, so he had to pick her up. She told him how much she loved her sister and apologized before she passed away. At that moment, no one, including me, believed his story. As investigators looked at the crime scene, a storm came the next morning, making it hard to find any clues. Still, there was enough evidence to convict him. After the trial, I was celebrated as a hero. I went out for drinks, smiling as people congratulated me one after another. But Mike's sad eyes kept haunting me. I had heard the remarks from his lawyers after the verdict, and while I understood the anger over the crime, I wasn't completely sure about Mike. I couldn't accept how poorly his case was managed, no matter what he may have done. So I fixed my clothes and stood tall, determined to show Mike that even though the decision didn't go his way, I would stay professional. When I approached him, he was crying, which is normal for someone in his situation. But I saw the tears of a broken man, not a bad person. In that moment, I felt something different for him, something other than disgust. As I placed my hand on his shoulder, he flinched, which surprised me. But when he looked up at me, I had to hold back a gasp. I wanted him to know I didn't support the celebration of his conviction. More than that, I wished I could do something to help. When I asked him if he had a message for anyone, I saw many feelings on his face. His family and friends stood not too far behind him, part of the joyful crowd celebrating his conviction. I glanced at them, noticing their happiness. I learned that his wife had divorced him just last month. She was to put half of their shared money in a trust account, though it wasn't much if he agreed to let her new partner, someone who was once his close friend, adopt his teenage kids. He knew there was nothing left for him with them. As I thought back on the last day of the trial, while sitting at a nice bar with my co-workers, I remembered how paint splattered on him while his daughter yelled at him. The hurt from his family's betrayal was clear on his face as he looked at them. For the first time in weeks, I began to feel uneasy with the people around me and the red wine I was drinking. His family planned to appear on several morning shows in the coming weeks to share their story. Now that Mike had been sentenced to life in prison, I felt sick and uneasy, even though I wasn't a part of that family. Mike's ex-wife seemed very excited about the money she might get from his conviction. Unfortunately, his children looked like they were getting caught up in it too. Soon they would become victims, used by adults trying to gain from someone else's suffering. I quietly left the celebration, saying I felt tired after the trial and headed home. About 30 minutes later, I sighed as I entered my small apartment. I changed out of my suit into a comfy pair of pants and a tank top. I rubbed my back, which had hurt all day from my tight clothing, while pouring a glass of water. I moved to my chair by the window, which had a nice view of the streets below and Kings Park. This was my place for thinking in the calmness of the city. Today was the best day of my career. I had successfully convicted a man named Mike in front of many news cameras. As a Crown prosecutor, I would likely be in high demand in Western Australia and maybe all of Australia for years to come. If I played my cards right, it could lead to a big promotion or even a position as a judge. And I was still only in my 30s. I took a long sip of my water, stretched out my free hand, and looked at my long fingers and nicely kept nails. I knew I lived a good life, but that thought made me think of Mike, who now wouldn't. As I looked out the window and saw my reflection, I frowned and remembered the sad look in Mike's eyes that I couldn't forget. I wondered if he was truly innocent, as he claimed. When I did my job, I used to feel good about putting bad people behind bars. But this time felt different. This victory seemed empty to me without the sense of justice I had hoped for. What if we were wrong? If we made a mistake, we would have taken away the freedom of an innocent man, and the real criminal might still be out there. I sat in my favorite chair for over 2 hours, troubled by that thought. I sipped my water and watched the late-night cars move through the streets below. The headlights of the cars almost formed a pattern as they drove along the roads. I thought about my own life while I stared out the window. At 35, I was a successful woman, a respected lawyer, and I was financially stable. But this success came with a series of broken relationships. I almost got married twice, but those men found it hard to accept my career. They liked that I was attractive and ambitious. But when things became serious, they wanted to control my choices. That wasn't something I could accept. I looked at my face in the glass again and made a face as I thought about kids. Sure, having children might be nice, but I liked my fit body. Even now, I felt strong and attractive, and my brown hair was shiny and healthy. I hadn't found a man yet who made me want to give up my lifestyle and the figure I had worked hard for. I let out a deep breath. I found it easier to feel better by being with different people. When that didn't help, I had a few personal things in my drawer that I could use. I rolled my eyes at the thought. After tough days, I often felt a strong need to be close to someone. I used to go out with friends, have a few drinks, and find someone to spend time with until I felt okay. Sometimes it was just one night, and other times it lasted longer. But all those moments started to feel the same, and none of them stood out. As I thought about Mike again and took a drink of water, I noticed a car waiting at a red light. I surprised myself by thinking about whether he was all right, if he was really guilty. He was stuck in prison for life. If he hadn't done anything wrong, he was facing the same future. I could only hope that things were fair for him inside. But when I thought about Mike, I realized I didn't want a relationship. I had no interest in going out to drink with my friends. I felt lost. The sadness in his eyes stuck with me. Mike, prison wasn't as easy as before my trial. Now that I had been found guilty and given 2 life sentences, it was much worse. Even though I was kept away from most prisoners, I still faced regular attacks. In the first 3 weeks, I was hurt 3 times, and not all the attackers were inmates. The last time, I had to stay in the medical room for 5 days. They only gave me a little medicine for the pain. When I asked for help, the staff and guards laughed at me, saying I'd be there a long time and that I wouldn't get an easy way out. Now that I was behind bars, they made it clear that help would take a long time. The cell I was in was awful. It was small, dull, and smelled bad. I thought other people had used the floor before I got there. After my half-hour of exercise, the mattress felt like a thin sheet on cold metal. The light overhead flickered like it didn't want me there, blinking on and off in a harsh way. My food was always thrown through the door. Most of the time it looked like it had been smashed, and sometimes it had something on it that didn't belong. I knew they would have liked to see me eat with everyone else, but they knew I wouldn't last 5 minutes with the other prisoners, and they wanted me to suffer. After what felt like a month since my trial, I lost track of time. Finally, things let up for a few days. The attacks stopped, and my bruises began to fade. One day, after my exercise in the small yard for isolated prisoners, they took me back to a different cell. It was clean and had a real bed. I looked at the TV built into the wall, and it seemed nice to be in a place where the light didn't flicker. At first I was nervous, sitting on the bed with my knees up, waiting for a guard to rush in or for an angry prisoner to come in. After a couple of hours, I started to feel a little better and picked up a book from the table. It was called How to Adjust to Life in Prison and Build Yourself Up Again. I was flipping through it when the door swung open. The warden walked in with a reporter and a camera team. I watched in surprise as the warden told the reporter and the camera how, even with my mistakes, I was being treated fairly. He mentioned his hopes that, even though I was in prison for life, the staff wanted me to become a good part of the prison community. However, while he spoke, he never asked me a single question. A guard standing by the cameraman gave me a frightening look. When I met his gaze, he clenched his fists in a way that felt threatening. I understood he wanted me to stay quiet. After the warden left, the guard made fun of me and dropped a thin brown envelope on the floor. "Here, Murderer Mike," he said, laughing at my nickname while I stayed silent. "Enjoy some reading." I heard him chuckle as he closed the door. I sat there for a few moments, staring at the envelope lying on the hard floor. I knew whatever was inside wouldn't be nice words from people who cared about me. From his laugh, I figured it wasn't even a legal letter about my appeal being turned down. I had been told that my appeal would never happen, no matter how hard I fought for my rights. No. Whatever was in that envelope was meant to hurt me. I looked at the small camera in the corner above the door. The only private spot in my cell was the bathroom, but I knew if I stayed there too long, the guards would break in and do something terrible, leading me back to the infirmary. I sighed and picked up the envelope. It had a seal and a note saying that the prison staff had checked it for anything wrong. I moved to the small metal table under the light, glancing at the camera one last time. I coughed quietly, shrugged, and opened the seal. I had thought my old life was gone forever. I was mistaken. They hadn't forgotten me. They wanted me to suffer, just like before. Inside the envelope were several papers. The first thing I saw was the signed adoption papers for each of my kids. Leo, John, and Matilda were now adopted by my old friend Steve Johnston. It hurt to know that even though Leo and John were over 18, they still chose to bring me pain. Along with that was a marriage certificate for my ex-wife Sandra and Steve. The next envelope had pictures from their wedding, happy moments with my parents, my siblings, and my kids with Sandra and Steve. The last few pictures showed them making rude gestures and holding signs telling me to suffer. Tears filled my eyes when I saw those last images. I knew from my past experiences that I was hated, but seeing the smiles and sneers on their faces opened a deep wound in my heart. The last envelope held photos of my ex-wife and Steve. They were hard to see. They didn't bring me joy at all. It felt like they were meant to hurt me even more, so I quickly tucked those photos back away. The final envelope included a letter in Sandra's handwriting. It was harsh. "Murderer! I hope life in prison is as tough as they say. I want you to suffer for what you did. We all put this together to make your time harder. I felt relief when your parents told me they were proud of me for being with Steve for 6 months before you were caught. I was unsure how to break it off with Steve, but I didn't have to because of you. I'm happy to say he makes me much happier than you ever did. Your family also stands by us. While I write this, I feel ashamed for ever loving you. But my dislike for you now is much stronger. You are awful, and I'm glad everyone feels this way about you. Your kids love their new dad, and we even have fun playing darts with your picture as our target. You should be proud of John. With our help, he can hit it almost every time. The only thing that bothers me is that I had to save some money for you. But since you can never use it, I guess that doesn't matter. Steve has a new job, and the money we make by talking about you makes up for it. The warden says they will make sure you have a long time to think about what you did. That makes us feel good. Well, I have to go now because Steve is waiting for me. You never got to experience that. But I know you might be facing something similar where you are. At least I have what I need. I hope you feel regret. Mike. By the end of the letter, I felt numb. I didn't even see the guards as they came to take me back to my cell. My world seemed as dark as the night sky. My heart felt heavy with sadness. If there was a light ahead in the dark tunnel, I was sure it would hurt my eyes. But they wouldn't let me end my suffering. When I was thrown back into my dirty cell with a flickering light, they took away my bedsheets so I couldn't hurt myself. I felt beaten down, and I chuckled silently as true sadness crept closer. I realized there was nothing left for me but a constant ache that only someone like me could understand. As I endured the rough treatment, I remembered that I had been their only comfort when those 2 innocent girls had passed away. I had to be strong for them. Burns, cuts, and food that even animals wouldn't eat couldn't take my memories away. Victoria, finally free. Due to the embarrassment and potential legal troubles for the news outlets, this story became a small note in the background. Still, it was all over the TV, newspapers, and online news around the world. Mike had been cleared of all charges after the real criminals were caught. 2 of them, the Turner brothers, were arrested when a police patrol spotted their speeding car. The police heard noises coming from the trunk, which made them chase the brothers down. In a short gunfight, the police rescued another victim from the brothers. This also helped solve many cases from the past 10 years, including the case of the Bustoff sisters. I was watching the forensic investigations closely. When the police searched the car, They found a bag in the back seat filled with bloody weapons, including a knife linked to the Bustoff sisters. I watched as the Turner brothers were questioned behind a glass wall. They were laughing and even admitted they liked that Mike took the blame for their crime against the sisters. These brothers were truly sick. They talked proudly about their wrongdoings and even about their twisted relationship, which was deeply wrong. They described everything in detail, from how they had taken the girls to the joy they felt during it all. Listening to them made many of us feel sick, including me. The only good thing about their terrible confessions was that their stories matched Mike's and cleared his name. They laughed as they recounted how Mike had seen them and called for help. They bragged about knocking him out before running away, leaving bloody handprints on his car seats. They thought they had fooled everyone, not realizing their DNA was still on the seats. No one had looked closely, but the brothers enjoyed the chaos they had caused. The next day, I was there when Mike was released, and a crowd of reporters, family, and curious onlookers gathered outside the prison. Mike was quietly brought out through a different door to a waiting car. I gasped when I saw him. Mike had never been a big man, but now he looked almost like a ghost. He had only been in prison for 8 months, yet I could see bruises and burns on his arms. His face had fresh scars that seemed not to have healed properly. He looked thin and weak, like he had been through a lot and was deeply troubled. As federal agents led him outside, he paused and looked around. When our eyes met, everything else faded away from me. I felt a tightness in my throat and couldn't breathe for a moment. Even though we were close enough to talk, I couldn't say anything. I felt ashamed of my part in what happened to him. I struggled to breathe, but after what felt like forever, I managed to say quietly that I had found them. I tried to smile, but his sad expression stopped me. Surprisingly, when he looked at me, I didn't see anger in his eyes. There wasn't much to see, but there was a moment when we understood each other. He smiled back at me when he realized what I meant. He nodded and looked into my eyes while the agents and nervous guards got his car ready. My phone rang, but I kept my eyes on him as I answered. "Vicky, it's Tony," my boss said. "I'm here," I replied. "I knew you'd be. Where are they taking him?" I asked. "To a safe house for witnesses. It's too dangerous for him to be anywhere else," Tony explained. I swallowed hard as I watched the car drive away. "I want to talk to him," I told my boss. "Is that a good idea, Victoria? You put him in prison," he replied. "I don't care," I said firmly. "That man has gone through so much, and we all played a part in it. If I have to do whatever I can to help him, I will." I paused, feeling heavy inside. "You didn't see his eyes, Tony. You don't understand." There was a quiet moment as I struggled to say more. "I get it, Victoria. We all know you're a big reason he's being released. Let me see what I can do," my boss said before hanging up. The next day, I sat with my friend Terrence Larkins on a sofa in the safe house. Mike sat across from us. Mike was covered in bandages on both arms, most of his right leg, and I even saw some bandages under his shorts on the left side. There was gauze on his face, and a tube was connected to his left hand for a drip. I guessed it was for pain relief because he looked very uncomfortable when he moved, but his eyes were aware, quickly darting around the room, taking in the surroundings. In the background, by the kitchen table, a federal agent watched us. I knew there were 2 others somewhere in the house. On the table was a half-eaten ham and cheese sandwich. After a moment, Mike noticed me looking at his sandwich. "You can have it if you're hungry, Miss Brown," he said. "I can't eat much anymore. Real food doesn't sit well with me," he added with a shrug. "Real food," Terrence said, eyeing the sandwich with a bit of disgust. "Mike, what did they feed you?" Terrence and I glanced at the agent, but his face was hard to read. "I don't know," Mike replied. "Most of the time it was leftovers, but they were usually old and dirty." He chuckled, but it sounded off, almost like a strange creature. Then he coughed, and I could hear something strange in his chest. I felt a wave of sadness for him, a person I had helped put in this situation. I couldn't look away from his sad face. "Anyway, we'll talk about that later," Terrence said, clearing his throat. Just as I was trying to hold back my emotions, Mike turned to me. "You really got them?" he asked, his eyes full of hope. I noticed he was focused on me now, not moving around like before. I couldn't help it. I leaned over the table and placed my hand on his. Tears started to fall down my face. "Yes, Mike, We got them, both of them. They are never going to hurt anyone again, I said, my voice trembling. Mike nodded, but I could tell he was struggling with his own feelings. Do I have to go back? He asked suddenly. What? I said, surprised. Mike, why would you think that? You're innocent. Why would you even think you need to go back to that place? I don't know, he replied sadly. They told me I had to go back. Who? Terrence asked, his tone turning serious. The agents, Mike said, glancing at the federal agents nearby who looked uneasy. No, Mike shook his head. The warden and the guards told me. Big Larry also said I need to go back since the warden wouldn't let him take a new person easily this time. I could see fear in his eyes, even though his voice was calm. He really believed he would be sent back to prison. Anger bubbled up inside me. We not only locked up an innocent man, but we also hurt him. I started to question the prison system. Nothing is perfect, but what they did to this fragile man was unjust. Mike, I began, but Terrence put his hand on my arm. I'm sorry, Victoria, he said. Could you and the agent please step outside for a few minutes? I need to talk to Mike alone. I bit back my angry words. This was why I had brought Terrence along. After I promised the agent that Mike would be safe with him, I stepped out and closed the door. I felt like everything I believed in was shifting beneath me. Today in the news, well-known Crown Prosecutor Miss Victoria Brown has secured the conviction of the Turner brothers, who are serial killers. They received multiple life sentences for over 15 murders committed in the past decade. Their capture helped clear the name of Mr. Mike. The news report continued with doctors and experts discussing the brothers' actions. These were the same experts who had examined my life over 2 years ago during my trial. I let out a scoff and turned off the TV, tossing the remote onto the table. I looked outside, taking in the view from my balcony. I closed my eyes and took deep breaths, just like my therapist had taught me. I could hear the ocean in the distance, calming me. These days, I felt almost normal when I looked in the mirror. After the painful experience of being wrongly accused and treated badly in prison, it took months of counseling for me to feel comfortable in my own skin, especially around more than 1 or 2 people. The day Terrence talked to me and became my lawyer at Victoria's suggestion was a big turning point. I often thought that Victoria knew exactly what she was doing when she brought him to meet me. Terrence worked for one of Australia's top law firms and was eager to take on my case right after our first meeting. He started taking legal action against all the news companies that called me a killer before the court had made its decision. There were many companies involved. He also sued those who used my name without having the right information before the charges were made public. I was surprised when most media companies agreed to pay me a lot of money to settle the cases. Terrence told me they knew that going to trial, where I was innocent, would cost them even more. They quickly decided to settle. In the end, I received nearly $84 million from over 30 different media companies. After I paid Terrence, the money I got was enough for me not to have to work again if I didn't want to. My lawyer was very happy with the result. After everything I went through in prison, Terrence made a deal with the government to drop my lawsuit against them. I got more than I thought I would. I wouldn't have to pay taxes anymore, and I would get a big refund each year. Plus, I got great travel perks for myself and my close family, which allowed us to visit anywhere in the country for free. As a bonus, the warden and most of the guards who treated me badly while I was in jail lost their jobs or were moved to lower positions while they were investigated. Some of those prison staff might face serious consequences and experience what they had done to me. To keep me safe, the government changed my name. I was now officially Joel Masters, a retired banker who had made money in the stock market. It wasn't the whole truth, but in my new town, most people only knew me as Joel. The person who helped me the most was Mayor Douglas, the leader of the local council. After Terrence helped me get my first settlement, Doug reached out to offer me a new home far from the troubles of my past. Doug had his own reasons for wanting to help me. Long ago, his brother was wrongly accused of a serious crime. Sadly, Doug's brother didn't make it out of prison. It was only a year after his brother's death that Doug learned the truth and cleared his brother's name. He wanted to do for me what he couldn't do for his brother. Together with Terrence, he found me over 500 acres of land by the beach, near the town of 1770. This land was meant to become a resort in 10 years, but now it was mine. I bought the land, and since I didn't have to pay taxes, it cost me much less than usual. The property was mostly made up of Australian bushes and beach plants. If you've seen the Australian coast, you would know this area. There were sand dunes with sturdy little trees further back, changing into gum trees and grassy areas. There was one small paved road that led to the property with hardly anything else around. It took me about 6 months to get everything in order after I took ownership of the land. During that time, I stayed in a nice motorhome that Terrence arranged for me. They first cleared and leveled over 5 acres of land. Then they built my 3-story house. Terrence hired the best engineers and builders. They used a lot of glass, strong steel, and shiny wood to make a house that felt more like a cozy resort. The great part was that my agreements with the government made everything cost much less than usual for such a big building. On the ground floor, there was a large open area. It had a lounge with enough sofas for almost 20 people, a dining area with enough seats for 12 more, and a kitchen with all the latest gadgets. There were 3 sinks, and the pantry was so big it could be like a kitchen by itself. I also had a big office with a guest area nearby in case I had visitors. On the 2nd floor, there were 4 large bedrooms, each one big enough to be called a master bedroom, complete with its own bathroom and beautiful views of the ocean. There was also a large game room with a pool table and a wall full of books, along with a cozy reading spot where I could sit and choose from many books while looking at the beach. The top floor was the master suite. It was so spacious that there were no walls between the bedroom and the bathroom. The big closet had a bench in the middle, and I even had my own deck outside, which included a large hot tub just for me. When Terrence and the architect first showed me the plans, I was amazed. I had no idea what to do with such a big house. But with excitement in his eyes, Terrence reminded me that I deserved something special after spending time in a small room. I agreed, but only if there were no harsh bright lights in the whole house. Since my house was far from any public services, I had a small solar farm set up on a hill about 500 meters away. It produces enough power to keep everything running for almost a week without sunlight. I also had a generator in a utility shed, with enough fuel to run for another month without needing more supplies from town. Finally, I made sure the property had several safety features. There was an electric fence running all around, powered by its own solar system. The property was surrounded by security gates and cameras, and while it didn't officially have a basement, there was a hidden room underground for emergencies. I didn't own the beach in front of my house, but since I was a bit away from the busy tourist area and my nearest neighbors were over 10 minutes away, I had a nice escape from the world. I could choose to stay away from people when I wanted to. After I was free, many of my relatives tried to reach me when they couldn't get in touch. They often called Terrence. I ignored my close family, my parents, siblings, and children, because they had hurt me too much. I did agree to meet some cousins and distant relatives, but only if I felt safe, and we always met at Terrence's office. If they mentioned getting back together with my immediate family, I politely said no. If they kept insisting, I chose not to speak with them again. One nice surprise was meeting Robbie and Amy. They were distant relatives, connected to me through many generations and marriages, but they understood how I felt. Robbie's family had let him down too. I remembered that Robbie used to be a skilled fighter. They lived a few hours away on the Sunshine Coast with their kids. I loved spending afternoons with them, sometimes at my place and sometimes at theirs. I also learned that Amy ran a successful investment company called Arrow. I was able to invest money with her, and it paid off well. Not having to pay taxes on that money helped me keep a good amount in my bank account. Another person I spent time with was Victoria. I didn't really understand why she wanted to be around me so much. At first, I thought it was because she felt guilty for her part in my past problems. She admitted to feeling some guilt, but as she helped me make decisions in those early days, our friendship grew deeper. In the beginning, I often left the room quietly whenever I couldn't decide if something was good or bad for me. When new people spoke to me, I would freeze up. I found comfort in asking Victoria for advice about whether a situation was a good idea or if someone was nice. Besides Terrence, my lawyer and therapist, she was the first person I trusted again. As we became friends, we started to talk about the trial and everything that had happened. However, if anyone else mentioned it, I felt anxious, even with my therapist. But for some reason, I felt relaxed with Victoria as we talked and watched my house being built. She told me that it was my eyes during the court trial that made her want to follow up on my statement about finding the Turner brothers. She blushed and looked away when she said it was her mission to see my eyes bright again. It was an unexpected friendship. After I was released, one of the first people I saw was Victoria. She was as upset as I was when she saw me so broken after the guilty verdict. Since that day at the safe house, it felt like Victoria was there for me almost every other day. She arranged for Terrence to be my lawyer, and she set up a counselor to help me. She didn't know about the deal I made with the media or the government, but she found an accountant for me, knowing I would be receiving some money. Even though Victoria had a part in my fall, she was never my enemy. Just as quickly as she helped bring me down, she was also the first to help me back up. I was surprised to find out that while she was working to prosecute me, she was also looking for the Turner brothers. Later, when her boss showed me pictures of her office filled with files and question marks, I realized that Victoria had always doubted my guilt. I managed to catch small parts of the trial against the Turner brothers, but I could only watch for a few minutes at a time. From what I did see, she never let her anger spill over. Even so, the way she stood and how she stopped the mean words from the guilty men showed what she really felt inside. Unlike the day my verdict was announced, there wasn't anything to celebrate when the Turner brothers were found guilty. Victoria held everyone responsible. She even held the judge accountable. The news noticed how she acted, and many wanted to interview her, but she turned them all down. Articles about her life soon vanished. No one wanted to upset Victoria Brown for fear of making her angry. However, she was different when she visited me, which happened every few weeks. One Friday, not long after I moved into my new house, I decided to go for a run. Halfway through, I tripped over a piece of old wood hidden in the sand. I fell and landed on some sharp pebbles, scraping my arm. It stung a bit and was bleeding, but it was nothing serious. When I got home, I found out that Victoria had come to visit. She was one of the very few people who could come to my home. She was one of my few friends, and to be honest, she was my best friend. When I walked in, I saw her bags next to the door and could hear the shower running. She must have just arrived a few minutes ago. I went into the kitchen to grab the first aid kit and take care of my scrape. While I was tending to it, Victoria came out and saw me. "Hey, Mike," she started, but then noticed my bleeding arm. "Oh no! Mike, are you okay?" She forgot her greeting and rushed to my side. She cleaned my arm and wrapped it in a bandage. I tried not to look too much because she hadn't put on a shirt yet. Wanting to be polite, I didn't want to stare. "There," she said, pleased with her work. "We can check this again tomorrow." She looked at me and saw that I was blushing. "Mike? What's wrong?" she asked, sounding a bit concerned. She looked confused for a moment, then glanced down. She blushed too, but seemed a little playful. "I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." We both felt a bit shy for a little while, but then we got back into our usual chat. She asked about my work with the prison release program. After getting a settlement and free flights, I started volunteering to help non-violent prisoners get their lives back in order once they were released. I spent a few days each month traveling to help, meeting with parole boards and working with those just out of prison to help them find jobs and services. I found it important to support these people as they adjusted back into society. Sometimes I would keep in touch with them for a long time. They called me Murder Mike, but treated me like a hero. The government liked this approach because it helped reduce the chances of them getting into trouble again. Victoria and I also talked about life back in Perth. She asked about my counseling sessions, and it felt like a normal friendship built on some tough experiences. One evening, after watching highlights of her big case against the Turner brothers, Victoria arrived home late from the trial. I had cooked us a spiced Moroccan chicken dinner on my deck. I had made it before, and I knew she enjoyed those flavors. I wanted her to feel safe and comfortable for the first part of our evening. We didn't say much. Both of us were thinking about the trial as we sat outside in the fresh evening air. We could hear the waves crashing on the shore. The sound was both calming and exciting. Victoria let out a sigh as we listened to the noise. After dinner, she suddenly said, "Mike, I quit my job today." I stopped, surprised. "You what?" I asked, holding my glass of wine. "I quit my job today," she repeated, looking out at the ocean where the lights of a cargo ship flickered in the distance. "Why?" I asked. "Victoria, you're great at your job. Why would you do that?" "Because I'm not great at my job. Look at what happened with you," she said, her voice trembling. I could see her shoulders drop as she felt the weight of her decision. "We've talked about this," I said. "You did what you were supposed to do. You did your best with the evidence you had." "I know, Mike, but—" She started to respond. "No," I said gently. "Victoria, you have won cases with less evidence before. You really nailed those Turner brothers." "But Mike," she said, looking at me with hope, "you never gave up. You knew something was wrong with my case, even while doing your job. Your boss, Tony, shouldn't have shown me everything, but he did. Even after the sentence, you kept investigating, Victoria. You were likely the only one who believed I could be innocent when everyone else wanted me to pay for what happened." "I heard about what you did with the prison staff after my release," I said, cutting her off. "It wasn't just Terrence, it was you." She nodded, tears still in her eyes. "So why would you quit?" I asked. We were quiet for a few moments. I stood up, walked around the table, pulled out another chair, and sat across from her. I took her hands in mine and waited for her to look at me. "Why?" I asked again. "This case. You changed everything for me," she said. "Before you, I was on track to be the youngest person to lead the state Supreme Court. I dreamed of putting criminals in jail and getting justice for families. I was determined. I was young, and people looked up to me." "You still are," I told her. "You're still doing that. You got real justice in this case. If it weren't for you, the Turner brothers might have gotten away with their wrongdoings for much longer. You are a strong and powerful woman, Victoria. Despite everything I've faced, you are the one who brought justice for that family and all the families affected by their actions." "So why would you want to quit?" I asked again. Victoria nodded and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I understand, Mike. I really do. Everyone keeps telling me how great I am, and maybe they are right. In some ways, I feel like I'm getting what I deserve. But Mike," I looked at her. "I can't do this anymore," she said with a strong voice. I leaned back in my seat, but she still held my hands tightly. "What do you want to do?" I asked after a pause. "I want—" She paused again. "Mike, I would like to stay here with you. Is that okay?" Her eyes looked serious. "Sure," I replied, feeling nervous. "I can help with the rent, that's not a problem, but I need to get away. I want to feel like myself again." I smiled gently. "Victoria, you are the most real person I know, but I understand wanting to escape. You can stay here as long as you need. Don't worry about rent. My friends don't pay either." The rest of the evening felt light, though a little awkward. I could see the relief on Victoria's face, knowing she could stay while she figured things out. "Victoria, how long has this been going on?" Sylvia, Doug's wife, asked me as we enjoyed our evening. I was flying back to Perth the next day after asking Mike if I could crash at his place for a few days, and I was excited he said yes. We had been invited to the Monitor's house because they wanted Mike to stay social while I wasn't around. The four of us just finished a tasty lamb roast while Mike and Doug cleaned up. Sylvia and I poured ourselves some port and set out 4 glasses, waiting for the guys in the fancy lounge. Then Sylvia gave me a knowing look and asked her question. "What?" I said, trying not to look at her. "That look?" Sylvia said, raising an eyebrow. "I've been watching you all night, Victoria. The way you look at Mike isn't just as a friend. There's something more." I felt my cheeks warm, realizing she had noticed. "You love him, don't you?" she said, not waiting for my answer. I couldn't hide it anymore. She had seen through my feelings. I just nodded. Sylvia put down the glasses and motioned for me to follow her outside. "Talk to me," she said as we stepped out onto the balcony. At first, I explained, I thought what I felt was just guilt. Everyone wanted Mike to pay for what happened, and I felt responsible for that. I felt so powerless that day in court, even though I had explained everything clearly to get a conviction. I knew I made a mistake when he was found innocent. I was so happy, and right after that, Mike trusted me enough to help him start over. I think that's really special. I see a strength in him that surprises me, even if he is smaller. If there were a strength test, I believe he could outlast anyone. Sylvia waited for me to keep talking. She nodded slightly. I really thought he might push me away at any moment. I explained that I was tough on him to do my job, but even when he was losing, he never gave up. The world tried to bring him down, but he kept his head held high. He never admitted he was guilty, even when it could have made his time in prison easier. I've come to admire him, Sylvia. He's been hurt and has lost a lot of what makes him who he is. But he uses what he has left to help others. As one of the few who gets to see the real him, how can I not feel something for him? I leaned over the balcony railing while Sylvia placed a comforting hand on my back. Feelings for who? I heard Mike's voice. I turned around, surprised to see Doug and Mike at the door, each holding a glass. Sylvia walked over to Doug and took a glass from him without saying a word, pulling him inside and leaving Mike and me alone on the balcony. It felt awkward. With a shaky hand, I took the glass from Mike. I looked into his eyes and saw sadness there again. He swallowed hard. "You're having feelings?" he asked, his voice tense. I nodded. Mike leaned on the railing where I had just been. Doug and Sylvia's home had a beautiful view, but as Mike rested there, I could see him relax a bit. "Who is this lucky guy?" he asked. He didn't know he was the one, and I could see it hurt him. So I leaned a little closer and gently touched his cheek. I looked into his eyes and smiled. Over the years, I had several relationships. Each was different, and each man had his own style. Most worked in law and often seemed full of themselves. They wore fancy suits and cologne, acting like they would take care of me. I almost got married twice, but deep down I knew it wouldn't work. We couldn't be open with each other. But right now, in this moment, as I softly touched lips with the man in front of me, this strong yet broken man made my heart feel something new. I had known for a while that I was falling for Mike. It started that day in court when he was sentenced, and I struggled with the uncomfortable feelings about what we had all done. Now, as I felt his lips against mine, I knew I was right. The kiss was gentle. I remembered a few months ago when Mike got shy. He didn't want to look at me while I helped him with a scrape from running on the beach. In that moment, I could see how much he cared. I hadn't meant to make him blush, but his shyness touched me too, making me feel excited, just like I did with that kiss. But then we pulled apart. He looked confused. "Victoria, what?" he asked, stumbling over his words. I smiled and took hold of his shirt sleeve. I pulled him closer and quickly kissed him again. Even this small act made me feel nervous. I wanted him, but I knew he was hurt, and it would take time for him to heal. I also knew he had received a good amount of money from the media. I wasn't sure how much it would take, but I hoped it would be enough. I thought if I combined my savings, a couple of $1 million with his, we might not have to work again. I wanted to spend my life loving this man, if he would let me. "You heard me right. I'm falling in love with you," I said again with a smile. "Why, Victoria? Why me? What have I done to deserve this?" he asked. I could see he was having doubts. His struggles made him feel unworthy. Mike. I sat down next to him at a small table and took his hands, just like he had done the other evening. He looked at me with hope and sadness. "Mike, you need to know it's true. I really am falling in love with you," I said again to make sure he got it. I watched as he swallowed hard. He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes, so I held his hands tighter. "Talk to me, Mike," I said. Honestly, I was worried. I had never felt so open before. Telling him I loved him was a big step. Usually it was the other way around. His anxious look told me he might want to run away. "Please," I begged softly. We looked at each other for a moment. Even though he looked away, I felt his grip on my hands tighten. "I'm scared, Victoria. I'm really scared to believe that someone cares about me, let alone says they love me," he whispered. I stayed quiet and waited, needing to be patient and let him think. "When you said you were falling in love, I felt like my whole world was about to crumble again. My first thought was that I might go back to prison." I gasped. He continued, "I mean, how can someone say they love me? I've done terrible things, Mike," he said, filled with worry and frustration. I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised a hand, pausing for a moment before putting it back down on mine, squeezing gently with a weak smile. "I know." "Not guilty," he said, interrupting what I was about to say. "But that doesn't mean I don't carry those scars every day." There were times when I thought I might break under it all. I wondered if I really had. "No, Mike. No," I said, my voice shaking at the thought that he could believe that. "I know, Victoria," he said, giving me a sad smile. "But the mind can trick you if you let it. And mine was messed with by many people for a long time." He noticed my face. "Yes, even you. But you were never unkind." He sighed. "We've talked about this. If there's anyone I'd want to be loved by, it would be you." I smiled, feeling a rush of joy. He must have felt it too, because he gave me a small smile back. "But I'm struggling to accept it," he said, looking at me again. I could feel my happiness change to worry. "When you said love, I have to admit I don't really know how to handle it. My last love broke me. They all hurt me while I was away." I nodded, remembering how his family bragged about hurting him. I even told the judge I wanted to keep them away from him. "I'm scared," he said again. "What if he couldn't finish what he was saying? What if it happened again? Would I stay by you?" I said this to him. He nodded, looking worried. The man I cared for needed help. He needed to know I would always be there for him. So then I would ask you. I would ask what happened and if you were involved. But no matter what, Mike, I would stand by you because I see the real you. You're not a bad person. I'm here for you completely. And if you let me, you'll have my support forever. After I said this, Mike broke down, falling to his knees as tears fell onto our hands. After a few minutes, I leaned down and hugged him. When he looked up a little later, he gently wiped away my tears with his thumb. Our lips met, and this time I felt his feelings hit me like a wave. Even though I was taller, he pulled me onto his lap and we kissed again. We spent about half an hour outside on Doug and Sylvia's balcony, speaking softly. Mike wouldn't say he loved me, but I knew he felt it. He just needed time to say it. Mike. That weekend with Victoria, it felt like something inside me broke open. For a long time, I had kept myself from feeling happy. I found joy in watching others reach their goals. But when it came to my own joy, I didn't think I deserved it. When Victoria told me she loved me, the walls I had built around my heart finally started to fall. Victoria had 6 weeks left in her job before she had to go back to Perth, but she promised we would talk every day. I met with my therapist, who smiled and told me I was brave for starting a new relationship. When I told him that Victoria felt the same way about me, he looked really happy. He was excited because Victoria had recommended him, so he already knew her a little. We talked about my feelings, and he assured me it was okay to accept Victoria's love. He encouraged me to think about my feelings and be open to sharing them. He didn't push me. Instead, he helped me think differently about my emotions. Did I love her? I was scared to let myself think about that. I was definitely drawn to her. She had been there for me during tough times. She saw me at my worst, held me when I felt overwhelmed, and never judged me. Even when I complained about my struggles, Victoria was there for everything and always made me feel accepted while I healed. She kept her promise. She called every day. We had long talks about her moving here with me. We discussed our relationship a lot. Several times, she carefully told me she loved me, and I shared that I cared for her a lot too. I knew she wanted to hear me say I love you, and I believed that day would come. But we both knew I wasn't quite ready yet. I spent my days thinking on the beach in front of my house. One of the things I started to love was fishing. Doug helped me get a surf rod and the right gear, so now I often cast my lines into the water and enjoyed the sound of the waves. On one of those sunny days, I set up my beach chair under an umbrella and put 3 fishing rods in the water. Then my lawyer, Terrence, called me. "Hey, Mike," he said. "How are you, my friend?" I could hear him chuckle softly. It's rare for me to hear someone call me a friend. I chuckled back. "It's true, but you're one of the few who has really helped me." There was a brief silence. "No, I mean it, Terrence. I know you and your firm have earned a lot of money from me." I remembered how upset he was with the news, for how much more I could have made if things had gone differently. Terrence laughed. "But you call me at least once a week. You've brought your wife and kids here 4 times in the last 6 months. A regular lawyer wouldn't do that." "Nah," he chuckled again. "I just get a free family vacation on the beach now and then." We both laughed. "But thank you, Mike," he said softly. "It really means a lot to me beyond the money. Constance and I think of you as a friend, and it matters to hear that from you." I glanced at my fishing rod on the other side. The tip was moving like it had a bite. "Okay, enough of the sweet talk. Terrence said as I reached for the line and laughed. Business call? I asked. Sort of, he replied, sounding a bit unsure. It's not about my old family again, is it? I asked. Lately, my kids had been asking Terrence where I was. They always seemed to want to share their sad stories and apologize for the past. No, Terrence said gently. This time, it's about Mary and Garland. He paused for a moment as I steadied the rod in my hands. Yes, there was definitely a bite on the line. He knew I was listening as I felt the fishing line tighten. Mike? Yeah, I answered, letting out a tired sigh. They want to meet. They asked to do it privately here in the office. We paused again. I reeled in a bit of line to take up the slack. Is this their 17th request? I asked quietly. It's actually the 19th, he replied. But this time, they have a plan. They want to formally apologize to you. I lifted the line, feeling another tug. Yeah, I said. I think you should meet with them, at least for your own peace. How about I set it up a couple of weeks from now? Sure, I said, jerking the rod. But suddenly, I felt the line go slack. The fish hadn't taken the bait. Meanwhile, I was nervously tapping my little finger on the side of my coffee cup. It had been almost a month since I saw Mike. We talked every day, but today felt different. As I finished my work, I was busy thinking about him. I missed Mike a lot, and I knew in my heart how wonderful it would be when we were finally together all the time. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the sadness of being apart for so long. In the past, it didn't feel this hard. But ever since that night, all I wanted was to be in the same room with him. That was all I needed. Mike's plane landed about 5 minutes ago, and I'm at the airport waiting for him. Today, he's meeting with Terrence about some important matters, but he's also going to see the bust-offs. Terrence has talked with them several times, and so have I. What happened to them was awful. Even though I don't have kids, I can't imagine going through what they did. After everything that happened in court, once Mike was cleared, they asked everyone to help them connect with him, including me. I softly suggested they reach out to Terrence, but they hit a wall there. It's a big deal that Mike agreed to meet them later today, and I worry about how he will deal with it. Ever since I shared my feelings for him, I've felt nervous almost all the time. I only saw him one more time after that. It was 2 weeks after I told him I was falling for him. I wished he would hold me tightly and make me feel special. But I knew it wasn't going to be like that. He was still struggling. During that weekend together, we walked along the beach holding hands and cuddled on the couch watching movies. We shared some sweet kisses, and my feelings for him grew even more. Mike was neither better nor worse than me. He was my real partner, someone I could trust with my heart, knowing he would take care of it. Just thinking about him and knowing I would see him soon made me a bit anxious. I knew today would be hard for him, but I already planned to take him out for dinner after his meeting with the bust-offs. It was unlikely anyone would recognize him now. He looked great, fit, with a shaved head, tan skin, and colored contacts. He was so different from the skinny guy he was before. I was lost in my thoughts when I felt a shadow above me. I looked up to see a woman a few years younger than me. I sort of recognized her. "Miss Brown," she said carefully. I nodded and stood up, feeling a bit worried. I glanced back towards the runway, trying not to show my nerves. "Miss Other?" I replied, trying to stay professional. The woman nodded. "Patricia," she said, confirming her name as Mike's sister. "What can I help you with, Patricia?" I asked, feeling uneasy as a plane rolled toward the gate. "I'm a little desperate, but I'm sure you remember my brother," she said. I tried not to laugh. "Of course, I could never forget him," I replied, keeping my face calm. Patricia looked down, her expression serious. "I was wondering if you've heard anything. If you know—" She trailed off. We both fell silent for a moment. I mean, after what we all did to him. I was hoping you'd know how to— She couldn't finish her thought. "You want to know if I can help you get in touch with your brother?" I asked for her. I sighed. "Miss Other," I said, trying to sound serious. "You, your brothers, your mother, and almost your whole family were part of one of the biggest mistakes this country has seen." Patricia nodded slowly. "When it all happened, you didn't even ask him if he was innocent. His mother, father, sister, brothers, wife, children, and friends all turned away from him. You and your mother also yelled at him. Now Patricia was crying. but she needed to hear this. When he was sentenced, I struggled to hold back my tears. I was in the room. I helped send away an innocent man. I felt awful. I couldn't connect the crime to what I knew about him. In a moment of kindness, I asked him if he had a message for anyone. He shook his head. Taking a chance, I looked back at the crowd. I saw you and your family celebrating his downfall. You didn't seem to care that your brother had been found guilty. You were happy. I paused as some people stared at us. I noticed the shame on her face. Your brother needed to escape from everyone and everything. He was given a chance to start over. If you really cared about him, you should let him go. Looking into the eyes of the man I cared for, I saw tears forming in his sister's eyes. There was a hint of regret there, but also urgency. It wasn't just about Mike, but how can we say sorry? How can we make things right? How can we get him to forgive us if we can't see him? His lawyer only tells us that Mike doesn't want to see us. His kids are searching for him every day. If you looked at their searches, finding their dad is what they care about most. They are still getting help for everything that happened. How will we ever be forgiven? Miss Brown, can you help us? Patricia begged. I hurt my brother a lot. I wish I could go back and protect him. How can I make him forgive me? We have searched all over the country for him. I'm waiting for Clayton, my brother. We heard he might be in Brisbane. Clayton has spent the last week looking into reports, but he hasn't found him. She finished speaking and looked down at her feet, feeling ashamed. Do you know there's a restraining order against all of you from seeing him? I asked, raising my eyebrows. I know, Miss Brown, trust me, we all know. But we're desperate, she replied. I glanced back to see the plane finishing its taxi. Why are you so desperate, Patricia? What good will seeing your brother do except cause him more pain? I didn't want to connect Mike to his family at all. Talking to Patricia felt risky. We haven't seen him since the trial, Patricia said. If Mike could forgive us and tell everyone he has, then we could go back to how things were. Go back? I asked, a bit annoyed. What do you mean by that? We're outcasts in our neighborhood, Miss Brown. No one wants to be with us since we treated Mike so badly. My parents get bothered everywhere they go. I face trouble at work and Clayton's kids get picked on. I shrugged. I understand that, I replied. You didn't just hurt your brother. You decided to join in the chaos too. Even if he did something wrong, your choices would come back to bother you. We see that now, she said sadly. So let me get this straight, I said, standing tall. As the airport staff started getting the passengers ready to leave, I continued, after everything you did to your brother, you want to find him and say sorry so he'll tell everyone he forgives you? I asked, surprised. You make it sound bad when you say it like that. She looked down. That's because it is, Patricia. It's not right to think your main reason is just to feel better about yourself. I sighed as the airport staff opened the walkway doors. Look, Patricia, the best advice I can give you is to think about why you want to talk to your brother. Once you understand your reasons, then talk with his lawyer to make real contact. She nodded. Thank you, Miss Brown, she said, her sadness clear on her face. We're desperate. I thought that since you know him from the trial... I understand, Patricia, I replied, noticing some movement. I saw Mike coming out from the walkway and quickly ran to him, giving him a tight hug as he reached for his glasses. I held him close for a brief moment. Joel, welcome back. It's great to see you, I said, adding, I think you're going to really like the surprise when I introduce you to an old friend from home. Mike suddenly seemed careful and kissed me back, knowing I had just used one of our special words for trouble. I noticed him scanning the area behind his sunglasses, and his lips tightened when they rested on his sister. Thanks, honey, he said, trying to sound calm. It's great to see you. I smiled because I knew that part was true. Let's get out of here, he said, linking his arm with mine as we walked past Patricia. I glanced at her. She was staring at us, not in a friendly way, looking at Mike's clean-shaven head, toned muscles, and new clothes. She didn't recognize him, and my calling him Mike by his new name hopefully threw her off. We didn't speak until we reached the waiting car that would take us straight to Terrence's office. Vicky, what the... he began to ask. I know, babe, I said, quickly looking at the driver. She shocked me. Apparently your brother was on that flight and they are looking for you. Why? He asked. I finally let out a sigh about his family that I had been holding back. No one was going to hurt him again if I could help it. They want to find you to say sorry, but really, it's just so they can get everyone off their backs. It's not about fixing things." I heard him sigh again. "There isn't much chance of that," he said, turning to look at the driver. "I can still feel the pain from her slaps. My cheek still stings when I remember it." "You called me honey?" I said when I pulled back to my seat. "Yeah," Mike said, smiling at me. "Did you miss me?" he asked. I looked at him shyly. I could feel he was getting more confident again. We flirted for the rest of the ride. I don't think he understood how much he was affecting me when we got out of the car. I quickly said I needed to use the restroom. It was almost as soon as we entered Terrence's office. The past month had been hard for Mike. Victoria and I were getting closer. We talked for hours, and I loved how understanding she was. She was the most patient person I had ever met. I felt myself falling for her quickly. I watched as we signed in at Terrence's office. Then she excused herself for the bathroom, and I couldn't help but admire her as she walked away. Every time she moved, it stirred feelings in me, just like it had many times during the past month. Not long after Victoria came back, Terrence greeted us and led us into a large conference room. His assistant came in to take our coffee orders before she closed the door behind us. Terrence tapped on a big folder filled with papers and looked at both of us. "Okay, what's going on?" he asked. "What do you mean, Terrence?" Victoria replied, acting innocent even though I knew she understood him well. He turned to me and I just smiled back. "I've known you both for a while and I've never—" He paused, looking at us before grinning. "You two," he said, pointing at us. Victoria nodded. "How long have you been together?" he asked. "It's been gradual," I spoke up before Victoria could answer. "We're just taking things one step at a time." "Well, good for you," Terrence said, still smiling. We chatted a bit more, and Terrence explained what to expect from the meeting. There were no legal matters to discuss. It was just a chance for some grieving parents to share their feelings. A few minutes before the meeting, Terrence's assistant came in and led us to a smaller, nicely decorated room with a couple of couches. When we walked in, I was surprised to see Mary and Garland already sitting there. They greeted Terrence and then turned to Victoria. When they saw me, they paused. "Mike," they said, realizing I wasn't just another lawyer. Mary quickly became emotional and kept saying how sorry she was. I let them share how they felt. Out of everyone, they had the best reason to be upset with me, especially since I had been cleared of my conviction. They had waited a year to reach out to me to show their feelings. They deserved this chance more than anyone else. "Mr. and Mrs. Bustoff," I said as we all took our seats. They sat on one couch while I sat on another, and Terrence and Victoria took chairs by the wall. I knew Victoria wanted to sit close to me, and I wished she would hold my hand, but for now I needed to handle this by myself. "Please, just call us Garland and Mary," Garland said softly, speaking for the first time. I nodded. "I know many people have tried to say sorry to you," he continued. "So I won't insult you by repeating that, but I truly regret everything you've gone through," Mary added. I nodded and smiled in response. His voice was calm and serious. He wasn't trying to avoid taking responsibility, but he also wasn't being overly dramatic when he apologized. As a fellow man, I appreciated that. "Mr. Other, can we ask you something?" Garland asked. I looked at him and smiled. "Of course. Garland, Mary," I replied, nodding to both of them. "You can call me Mike." Both of them smiled and seemed to relax a bit. "What's your question?" I asked. Mary reached out and touched my arm. "How are you?" she asked. It was a simple question, spoken gently, but it hit me hard. It felt like I had been pushed back in my chair, just like when I was in prison. "I'm good," I replied. It was the usual answer when I didn't want to share much. But when I looked into Mary's eyes, I realized she could see I wasn't being honest. I sighed. "No, that's not right," I admitted. "I have good days, but most nights I think about your daughters and the painful times I've faced. The shame my family made me feel weighs on me. I'm far from good." I could see their faces change, and I knew even Terrence and Victoria would look sad if I turned around. But still, I have hope. And right now, that's enough, I said. Mary gave me a small smile that showed she understood. After all, she had lost both of her daughters. I took a deep breath. It was time to be brave. "Can I tell you a story about the first time I met your girls?" I asked, feeling my emotions well up. It felt like only a moment had passed. Something was jabbing me in the ribs, and I could feel leaves in my hair and something sticky on my face. I squinted, but it was very dark. I knew my eyes would get used to it soon, but it would take a moment. I reached up to my face and brushed a muddy leaf off my cheek. Then I touched the back of my neck and winced. I could tell I would have a painful bump there. Suddenly I stopped, wondering if the people who had hurt me were still nearby. I listened and heard deep male voices moving through the bushes away from me. I felt nervous because even at my best, I wouldn't be able to fight most people. I was a small, regular guy with a bad haircut and a mustache. I should have shaved a long time ago. I heard the deep voices laughing and then car doors slamming. A car drove off, which I thought was the one I had seen earlier. I coughed, feeling pain in my neck from a strong blow. Then I heard something else. I froze. Someone was crying. It sounded like two girls. Despite the pain in my neck, I stood up carefully and stumbled a little way into a small open area. The place smelled bad, like something was rotting, and the air was heavy even with the pale moonlight shining through the trees. I could see the girls weren't okay. The bigger girl, who I learned was named Tina, was breathing heavily. One of her eyes was swollen shut and her shirt had a big red stain. I won't say much more because it is too upsetting. Maisie, her younger sister, seemed a bit more aware of her situation, even though I could see dark red marks on her body. "Hello there, girls," I whispered to the two sisters, hoping not to scare them. I was scared myself, but I tried to keep my voice calm. They hardly moved, sensing I was close. "You're going to be okay. I've called for help. They'll be here soon." Tina coughed and looked at me with her one eye that wasn't swollen shut. We both understood that help might not come in time. I sat down between them, getting closer to Maisie now that they knew I wasn't a threat. I felt a mix of emotions and a pain in my neck from being hurt before. "I'm Mike," I told them, feeling overwhelmed as I looked at Tina. My heart sank seeing her injuries, just like her sister. There was one injury on her stomach that looked serious. Without thinking, I tore a piece of my shirt and pressed it against her wound. "It's okay, Mr. Mike," Tina whispered. "It doesn't hurt as much anymore. How's Maisie?" "It hurts a lot," I said, but before I could finish, the little girl cried out. She coughed, and I felt my heart ache. I tore more of my shirt and pressed it against both girls' injuries. I tried to see how badly they were hurt and pressed where it was most needed. Tears flowed down my face as I felt helpless. I wanted to comfort them, so we shared brief introductions, connecting in a way only those who've faced hard times can. "Hey!" I said, wanting to cheer them up even as I fought back my tears. "Would you like to hear a story? My kids love it when I tell stories." Tina was lying on my lap and I had my arm around Maisie as she leaned against me. "That sounds great, Mr. Mike," Tina said, sounding very tired and closing her eyes. I gently nudged Tina. "I need you to stay awake for me." I didn't know much about injuries, but I had seen in movies that staying awake was important. I heard Maisie sigh and cough again. "Tina is always sleepy. Mom says that happens when you're a teenager. But a story sounds nice, Mr. Mike." I spent the next little while fighting tears and sadness as I told them stories about princesses and princes. In my stories, the prince always saved the princess from the bad guys, and they lived happily ever after. I saw them smile as I spoke, but with each heartbeat my feelings grew stronger, filled with pain for these little girls I had just met. Deep down, I knew I would be the one to watch them leave this world. I couldn't hear any sirens as I finished my story. And they all lived happily ever after. I gently stroked Tina's hair and looked at her injury. She flinched as I moved closer. "It's okay, Mr. Mike. You've done your best. We're glad you're with us," she said, sounding very wise for her age. I saw tears in her eyes as she tried to look at me, but it was hard for her. I nodded, feeling Maisie squeeze my arm. "It's going to be tough, Mr. Mike. Tougher than anyone can handle," the little girl said, her voice sounding older than her age. I hugged her like I would have hugged my own daughter when she was young. "I know, sweetie," I replied. Suddenly, Tina spoke up, answering her sister. "She means what happens next. Mr. Mike, I know you will always remember us in this moment. Maisie wants you to know you're a kind and loving man. Never forget that." At that time, I didn't fully understand what they meant. "I'll do my best, girls," I promised. Until that moment, I had never shared my time with the sisters. I helped the girls hold hands. We all cried together. Some tears were happy and some were sad. I felt sad about what was happening, but happy they were together, showing their love for each other. "Mr. Mike," Tina said a few minutes later, "Maisie has fallen asleep and I can't wake her." I started to panic, but then I realized Tina was still talking to me. I looked down at the fading girl resting in my lap. "When it's time, can you tell our mom and dad that we love them? Tell them goodbye, sweet cats." She tried to joke about a family saying, but ended up coughing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mike. I am." With those words, Tina drifted off, saying how much she loved her sister. Just like that, she became quiet. I cried out in deep pain, feeling hurt that wasn't about myself. When the first responders and a few police officers found me, I was holding both girls and crying. I was covered in their blood from trying to stop their wounds, my shirt torn, and the girls' injuries were clear in the flashlight light. They quickly pushed me to the ground and put handcuffs on me. I don't remember much of what happened in the next few days until I heard the charges against me. As Mike finished his story, everyone was shocked. Even Terrence, Mike's tough lawyer, had tears on his face. Unlike most people, he understood more about what Mike had been through. But hearing how Mike comforted those two sisters as they left this world was too much for even someone tough like him. I couldn't hold back my feelings. The man I loved was in deep pain, remembering one of the hardest moments of his life. His body rocked back and forth. As he broke down, I rushed to the couch and held him close. I had heard Mike talk about his time with the girls, but watching that heartbreaking scene was overwhelming. To be there for the sisters as they slipped away and then feel the world turn against you for being kind was too much. No one should have to go through that. I closed my eyes and rocked him gently, my tears mixing with his. His hand found mine, and we swayed together as we cried about what we had just heard. After a while, I opened my eyes and looked at Mary and Garland. They were hugging each other tightly as if the world was about to end. Mary had her head on Garland's chest, but even through her tears, she was watching Mike. When she noticed me looking, she gave me a sad smile and nodded. Slowly, Mike started to calm down, and we all waited for him to collect himself. When he was ready, he saw the sad faces of Tina and Maisie's parents, but he didn't say anything right away. He let go of me and knelt in front of them, taking their hands. "Mr. and Mrs.," Mike said softly but firmly, "your daughters were two of the bravest and strongest people I've ever known. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there sooner. I wish I could have saved them. I would have done anything to help them." He stumbled over his words. Mary leaned down, tears falling again. She gently held his face in her hands and kissed his forehead. "You wonderful man," she said softly, her voice strong enough for everyone to hear. She struggled to keep her own feelings in check to speak. "You gave our girls comfort in their last moments. No one could have done more for them than what you did. I'm thankful that you were there for them. Thank you, Mike. Thank you with all our hearts," Mary said, trying not to cry. Mike nodded back, and soon we were all in tears again. Terrence stepped out for a moment and came back with tissue boxes for everyone. When Mike stood up again, Terrence hugged him like a brother he hadn't seen in a long time. Terrence led Mike back to the couch and into my arms. I held him close, not caring about who was around. I wrapped my arms around Mike, feeling amazed by his strength. After everything he had been through, he kept going. His family didn't quite understand. We talked a bit more while Mike rested. He was feeling better and could speak without breaking down. Mary and Garland wanted to give him a check for $15,000, but Mike smiled and looked at me. "Mr. and Mrs. Garland, thank you for the money, but I don't really need it," he said. They looked worried, almost pleading. Then Mike said, "Instead of taking it, would you consider putting it towards a charity?" They looked surprised. "I've been working with the prison system, helping non-violent offenders get back on their feet after serving their time," he explained. Garland and Mary nodded, paying close attention. "But after hearing about your daughters and other things I've been through today, I was wondering if you would help me start a charity to support children affected by domestic violence." I could see that Mike's idea touched them. We spent another hour coming up with ideas. Mike and Terrence would be part of the charity. Mike would use his real name for recognition, but wouldn't take part in the daily work to avoid too much attention. By the end of our talk, Mike was smiling again, and we all hugged like old friends. When Mary hugged me, she whispered, "He loves you, dear." I could tell you care for him too, but he's scared. He's afraid to take a chance. I believe he will for you." She gently held my face like she did with Mike. "Please take care of him. Protect his heart. He means a lot to me, like my daughter." I nodded, feeling teary-eyed like she was, but she had shared what she needed to. When the bus stopped, Terrence closed the lounge doors, leaving Mike and me alone together. We snuggled on the couch and soon fell asleep. It was late afternoon when Terrence, with his assistant, came in to wake us up. "I'm sorry to wake you two. Terrence wants to know if you would join him and his wife for dinner tonight." We agreed, and she arranged for a car to take us to my place first, then to Mike's hotel. Mike looked surprised when I quickly packed a bag with some clothes and makeup and hurried him into the car. "Don't give me that look. I'll get ready with you, and then we can meet Terrence together," I assured him as we drove. Of course, Terrence had put Mike in a beautiful hotel suite. It had 2 bedrooms, a big sitting area, and a nice bathroom. I smiled because I could see Mike's reaction. He seemed a bit uneasy. I paused and asked, "Are you okay, Mike?" I was beginning to have feelings for him. I knew I might be pushing things, but I wouldn't go too far if he wasn't comfortable. He looked at me for a moment, as if he was struggling with his thoughts. Then, for the first time since he saw me, a smile slowly appeared on his face and he seemed more relaxed. "Thank you," he said, stepping closer and sending a shiver through me. I laughed lightly as he held me. I needed to gently push him away to finish getting ready, hoping my outfit wouldn't get too wrinkled. After a moment, we pulled apart. I grabbed a tissue and wiped some lipstick off his lips, then gave him a playful push while laughing. "Now go on, let me finish so we can have dinner," I said, guiding him out of the bathroom while he chuckled. After closing the door, I leaned against it, smiling with my hand over my heart. I felt a rush of excitement. My guy wanted me, and it was thrilling. When Mike came out 20 minutes later, he looked wonderful. His dark hair was neatly styled, and he wore a nice outfit that made him look sharp. I felt a mix of pride and surprise. In my past life, I had a busy family and 3 kids, yet I hadn't felt much excitement for years. I had tried looking online for some spark, but it never worked. I just couldn't find interest. But over the past month, Mike's feelings for me had become very clear. I felt something inside me starting to wake up, something I vaguely remembered but wasn't sure how to handle. In my mind, it all made sense. Since I got out, Victoria had become my closest friend. She was always there for me, and when she told me in Queensland that she was starting to like me, I wanted to doubt it. But deep down, I knew I was beginning to feel the same way. At one point, I worried she might be interested in my money, but she didn't know how much I really had. I thought she must realize it was more than just a little. Still, I knew she was doing well on her own as a successful lawyer. I remembered how she confidently handled my sister at the airport. She could have tried to get closer to me, but she didn't. Instead, she focused on looking out for me. After my breakdown earlier, when I was talking to the others, it didn't upset her that they saw her holding me, even when I was crying hard. I could feel Victoria's warmth around me. All I sensed from her was love and concern. That evening, as I watched Victoria get ready, I understood that her makeup and beautiful outfit were for me. She was helping me come out of my shell little by little, and my feelings for her grew stronger. Love. We sat with Terrence and Constance at the restaurant, enjoying a delicious meal. I had a tasty steak with all the sides, plus a glass of wine that went well with it. I saw Victoria laughing at a funny story Constance told about the time their son made a mess on Terrence's fancy suit while changing a diaper. When Victoria felt me watching her, she turned and smiled back at me. In that moment, I knew it was love I felt for her. It wasn't just a crush like before. This love had built slowly. Our connection went beyond just looks. We supported each other emotionally. We had both faced hard times, and while she helped me recover, we fell in love. I loved the woman who was looking at me now. Our eyes met, and time seemed to pause for a moment at the table. "You okay, buddy?" Terrence asked, noticing I seemed lost in thought. My friends were used to me zoning out sometimes. I looked away from Victoria to Terrence and Constance. "Yes, sorry. I was just thinking about how much I love this woman," I said, pointing to Victoria. Their eyes widened at my words, and Victoria gasped, looking at me with hope. I saw a few tears in her eyes. "Mike, did you?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. I smiled at her. "Yes." She smiled back at me, brighter than before. "Victoria Brown," I said, looking deeply into her eyes and holding her shaking hands. "Thank you for being there for me, for being my best friend, and for helping me find myself again. This past year, you have been the kindest person in my life. You have never asked for much from me. You have never yelled or left me alone during my tough times. I've felt this for a while, but now I can say it clearly. I love you." With that, she nearly jumped into my arms, her tears smudging her makeup. A moment later, Constance came over with tissues. Victoria thanked her as she dried her eyes, and Terrence just grinned widely. When Constance suggested a trip to the restroom to fix our makeup a little later, Victoria shook her head. "I'm not going anywhere. My man just told me he loves me." Looking back at me again, she repeated, "I'm not going anywhere." After that, Victoria leaned in closer to me, her arm always touching mine for the rest of the night. When dessert arrived, we ordered several different things and shared them using the same fork. Later that evening, we went back to my hotel room and got ready for bed. I felt nervous but excited about what was coming next. Victoria shared that we would stay together in the same bed for the first time in years, and a wave of feelings rushed over me. "Victoria," I smiled as I felt Mike's weight beside me as I pulled him onto the bed. I loved being close to him. I felt so happy and surprised by all the good feelings we shared. "Yes," I said softly as the moment wrapped around us. We enjoyed being close to each other, exchanging gentle touches that made my heart race. I noticed the scars on his back. They showed that he had faced some hard times. They were older now, reminders of what he had gone through. Time was helping them heal. While the past would always be part of him, it could slowly fade. I leaned closer to Mike, who looked at me with hope. I had been waiting for this moment for months. I could tell he wanted me to open up to him. I knew he cared about making me happy, but I wanted him to feel my care too. So I decided to do something new. I understood this was a big step for both of us. I noticed that Mike had a nice tan with no lines from the beach. That made me smile, thinking about how we would have fun once we got back to his place. Right now, I focused on the man in front of me. I could tell he was a bit nervous, but I wanted him to know he didn't need to worry. I felt excitement rush through me, filled with energy. I wanted to keep this moment going. He seemed to relax, then looked into my eyes and asked, "Are you sure?" I nodded, feeling warm inside. "Yes, please be with me," I said softly. He started to come closer, and I remembered my past experiences, knowing that sometimes they hurt, but this felt so right. I felt joyful, like I could melt with happiness. My mind got lost in the bliss of it all. His gaze was full of feeling, and I sensed the love growing stronger as we shared something special. At one point, I lost track of time because the feeling was so wonderful. When I came back to my senses, he whispered softly in my ear, "I love you." I felt calm and happy as we lay there. "I love you too," I replied, giving him a gentle kiss as we drifted off together. In the morning, I woke up to a feeling I hadn't expected. A lovely woman cuddled against me. "Good morning," she said with a smile. "Good morning, beautiful," I replied. "Yes, this is one of the best views I've had in years." She laughed and playfully got up to go to the bathroom. We had to peel the sheets away from the night before, and she giggled as she did. "Last night made me feel so cherished and loved. It was wonderful," I said, stepping into the warm shower and closing my eyes. A moment later, I heard the toilet flush, and suddenly Victoria's arms were around me as she joined me. "This is just wonderful," she teased. "I'll have you know that was the best night of my life," she went on. "The man I had liked for a long time took me out for a special evening, told me he cared for me, and then we shared a wonderful moment before I slept in his arms. We laughed together, enjoying the moment. I said, okay. It was amazing. Thank you." I turned to her as she let out a happy shout of surprise. "Mike," she said. I felt so alive again. A warm energy filled my whole body. "I love you," I said while we held hands and walked to the restaurant downstairs. We got a table quickly and ordered omelets and coffee. Victoria had only 1 week left before finishing her work. I decided to stay and help her get everything ready. I planned to meet with one of the parole agencies I worked with here in Perth, and maybe spend some time with Terrence and the volunteers working on their new charity if they were free. After breakfast, she gave me a quick kiss goodbye and went to work, leaving me alone for the first time since arriving in Perth. Usually I felt nervous when I was alone, especially far from home. But after the night before, I felt calm. I ordered another coffee and enjoyed reading a book in the hotel lobby. Later, I decided to take a walk around the city. It was the first time in years I strolled through the streets where I grew up. I noticed some changes near my old workplace and shook my head as I watched people come and go. I even saw a few old co-workers. Some looked right at me, but none seemed to recognize me. I called Terrence, and we made plans to meet in 2 days to talk about the charity. He told me that my sister had called, asking to see me again. It seemed that the surprise meeting between Patricia and Victoria made her want to reach out. For the first time in a long while, I tried to see my old family in a different light. The love I felt for Victoria helped ease some of the bitterness I carried toward the world. Still, I really didn't want to talk to or meet my family. Maybe one day I would see my kids, but not yet. Their problems, because of how they treated me, were not my concern. The rest of the week went by quickly. During the day, I worked on my various charities, and at night, Victoria and I went out before returning to our hotel, where we enjoyed being together and fell asleep in a cozy pile. When the week ended and we flew back to Queensland, I felt like a new person. After just 3 months of dating, Victoria and I got engaged. We didn't think it was too quick. As Doug said, we had nearly been inseparable for the last year. He was surprised it took us this long. We set a date for 4 months later. That was just enough time to get everything sorted out. Terrence helped us prepare a prenuptial agreement. Basically, we would keep our own accounts and have a shared account for bills and savings. My money and investments were off limits to Victoria, and the same went for her. Any joint investments we had would be shared equally. We had a small wedding on the beach in the afternoon, close to our home. Terrence, Victoria's mom, Denise, and a few others were there. Sadly, Victoria's father had passed away. Denise found out about Victoria and me shortly after I got out of a tough situation. She asked her daughter why she often traveled to Queensland when it wasn't for work. When Victoria told her the truth, it was a bit awkward for a few days. But I began to enjoy my time with my new mother-in-law. She had a sharp sense of humor just like her daughter, and still cherished her late husband as much as when they first met. We settled into a nice life. Now that she was retired, many law firms wanted my wife to work with them. But like me, Victoria preferred Terrence to handle all our communications, keeping our life private. She was surprised when she learned how much I was worth. She thought our home in 1770 was valuable and believed that combining our money would make our lives easier. She felt she was bringing more to our relationship than I was. We enjoyed our time together by walking, reading, and fishing. When I traveled for charity, she always joined me. On the rare occasions I traveled without her, she insisted I call her at least 3 times a day. What made me realize I was truly in love was our first fight. It was about how to fold towels, of all things. Victoria had her way, and I had mine. Living by the beach, we went through many towels, and she quickly got frustrated that I didn't fold them like she did. Our words weren't too harsh, but we disagreed. She called me stubborn, and I might have raised my voice a bit when she realized what was happening. Victoria got upset. "I'm sorry, honey. I mean, towels are just towels," she said while sitting on the floor near the cupboard. I chuckled and ran my hand over my shaved head. "Darling," I said with a smile and sat next to her, pulling her close. "I'm sorry for yelling. You're right. They are just towels." This became how we handled disagreements. We always ended up laughing and seeking each other out afterward. About 6 months later, our lives changed again. I was feeling a bit sad. It was the first Sunday in September, which is Father's Day in Australia. For the first time since getting remarried, I felt the absence of my kids. I hated what they had done, and for many years that anger had overshadowed the love I still felt for them. I was still their father, even though my old friend was now the official dad. My youngest child would have turned 21 a few months ago. I sat on the back deck, a book on the table in front of me, and a glass of juice beside it, with a few drops of water running down the side of the glass. But my thoughts were on my kids as I gazed at the ocean. I felt a sadness for what once was. I didn't directly see Victoria sit down beside me, but I felt her presence. "Are you okay, Mike?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Yeah," I sighed. "It was just a tough day." I looked at my wonderful wife and she nodded at me. "I know, sweetie, I get it. It's Father's Day and you're not feeling like a dad." She seemed to read my mind. Earlier, I had called Garland and Mary. The call had me feeling a bit emotional, but I knew I needed to talk to them. Over the last few months, we had become quite close. They felt more like family to me than my own family. Victoria gently wiped away a tear I didn't even realize I had. "Mike," she said, her voice a bit worried. Her tone brought me back to the moment. "Are you okay, Victoria? I know you miss your dad today, too." I looked at her. She had been very close to her father. She shook her head, looking like she was about to cry. Slowly, she pulled out a plastic strip and handed it to me. At first, I thought it was a COVID test. The world had mostly moved on from the pandemic, but it's always good to be careful. But looking at the strip and seeing the tears in my wife's eyes, I began to understand. Victoria nodded, confirming my thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm pregnant," she said. I felt a mix of emotions inside. Before meeting Mike, I never thought about having kids. Sure, kids were cute, but I was focused on my job. Having children wasn't in my plans. Then I fell in love with Mike, my best friend and soulmate. Being with him was amazing, and I often thought about what it would be like to have kids together. We were both a bit older, me in my mid-30s and Mike in his 40s, but it felt possible. We had only talked about kids twice, and both times I could see the pain on his face, reminding him of losses he had faced. I wanted to bring it up again around Christmas, hoping to have a serious talk since we needed to decide soon if we wanted to have children. "How did this happen?" Mike asked, looking at the strip and then at me, his eyes drifting to my belly. In that serious moment, I couldn't help but laugh. "Well, when a man and a woman," I trailed off, and he smiled. "Not a total loss. I know we do spend a lot of time together, but how did this happen?" "You were on birth control, right?" Mike asked, curious but not angry. I nodded. "I think it was at Doug and Sylvia's party. We had quite a few drinks, and I took my pills a bit late," I explained. "And that weekend, you were feeling quite generous." Mike smiled at my joke and laughed as he remembered that night. "Are you okay?" he asked, catching me off guard. I was ready to support him. Our life together felt almost perfect. Having a child would bring some surprises, and I wasn't sure if Mike was ready for that. "I think so, honey," I answered. "A couple of weeks ago, I felt strange. I could smell everything, and honestly, my clothes were bothering me. When my period was late this week, I went to the pharmacy to buy some tests. I didn't even realize it was Father's Day today, but—" "Surprise," I said softly, watching his reaction. It wasn't what I expected. I thought Mike might panic, cry, or even leave. Instead, he smiled. "We're going to be parents," he said, leaning in to kiss me. "We're going to be parents," he repeated, bending down to kiss my belly with a big grin. "Do you hear me, little one?" he said to my stomach. "Your mom and I are going to be your parents, and we will love you like nothing else." I smiled as he talked and pushed my belly out a bit. It made us both laugh as he kissed me again. That night, Mike was very gentle with me. He was careful and took his time to make sure I was comfortable. His kindness reminded me of how much I loved him. I could still see he was working through some things, but his quiet strength showed how much he cared for me. The fading scars on him were the only signs of the hard times he had faced. The next day, Mike and I went to town to confirm the pregnancy. We picked up all the vitamins and things you need when expecting. He treated me like royalty, always smiling. I had never seen him so happy since our first night together. When the time came, he proudly shared the news with my mother. She burst into tears of joy at the thought of becoming a grandparent. She had worried I might never give her that chance because I was so focused on my legal career. Doug and Sylvia decided to throw a surprise dinner party, and we enjoyed a wonderful meal. Everything smelled amazing, and I was very hungry since the babies were taking a lot from me. Yes, we were having twins. When we went for our first checkup, the doctor could barely see anything, but the nurse quickly found 2 separate heartbeats. The checkup showed that the twins were in good positions and looked healthy. Having twins also explained why I was gaining weight so fast. I did miss my toned abs and nearly perfect legs, but Mike kept telling me how beautiful I was as my body changed. My doctor said everything was going perfectly and that I had a lovely glow. However, seeing the loving look from my husband made me forget all my worries about how I looked. As my pregnancy went on, I felt bigger, almost like a barn with 2 kids kicking inside me. But with my random tears and cravings for pickles and honeycomb ice cream, I could still feel that glow. Everyone said Mike's smile gave me extra strength. He was so happy whenever we were together. He shared that having our kids with him felt like a chance to do things the right way. I understood how he felt. My husband handled my mood swings well. They were stronger due to the hormones from having 2 babies, but he always stayed calm and was ready to help me with anything I needed. When it was time to go to Perth for a charity board meeting, I went with him. I realized that soon I wouldn't be able to travel until our babies arrived. Instead of using regular flights, Mike arranged a private plane for us to fly to Perth and back. I had flown privately a few times before, but this was Mike's first time, and it was amazing. As soon as the flight crew saw that I was pregnant, they treated us like we were very special. They brought us meals and even warm towels. At one point, when one of the flight attendants offered me a foot massage, it felt great. I jokingly told Mike that I wanted to have a little adventure in the sky. He took me to a quiet spot where we could relax, and we ended up being a bit noisy, which made the friendly flight attendant smile knowingly. When we came back out just before landing, Mike had a company car waiting to take us, and he helped me get off the plane. Even though I felt big and uncomfortable, my husband made me feel cherished. On the ride from the airport to the city, Mike and I talked about the upcoming board meeting. We had spoken to Mary and Garland several times over the past week, but this was the first time we would see them since I got pregnant. Terrence and Constance were also there, and I knew Constance wanted to hear how I was doing. There was a special joy about my pregnancy that went beyond what friends usually feel. Everyone knew how much this meant to Mike, so it was surprising when we stepped out of the car in front of Terrence's office and Mike's past suddenly appeared. "Mike! Daddy!" a voice shouted. I hadn't heard it in years, and I froze for a moment. Victoria and I had just arrived at Terrence's office. I got out to help Victoria, who was pregnant, out of the car before the driver could. I was focused on her when my daughter's voice cut through the moment. Slowly, I turned and saw a small group standing about 12 steps away. They seemed to have been waiting for me. The group included my daughter Matilda and my 2 sons, Leo and John, my sister Patricia, who Victoria met at the airport, and my parents, Brant and Roberta, were also there. As I turned, they all looked at me. My eyes widened in shock. The moment I had feared was here. I felt like a deer caught in headlights. My chest felt tight, making it hard to breathe. My muscles tensed, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. It prepared me to either run away or face what was happening. Victoria wrapped her arms around me for support. I knew she sensed my emotions. She saw my former family there, and I could feel her anger growing to protect me. "I'm sorry," Victoria said to my daughter, her tone showing her rising anger. "That's my dad," Matilda replied, looking right at me. "I know it's you. You look different, but it's definitely you." "I'm sorry, but my husband Joel," Victoria said, stressing my name, "lost his whole family a long time ago. Now he has me, and soon we will have our little ones." She smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. I was frozen in place as memories rushed back. I thought about my parents and siblings. There were happy moments, but also angry words, fights, and long days in court. I felt like I was falling apart. Over the last few years, Victoria had worked so hard to help me feel better. Now, just seeing my past was breaking down all the walls I had built around myself. I felt Victoria start to guide me toward the doors. The woman I had helped out of the car was now leading me forward. A part of me that was still clear knew what to do. I relaxed and let her take charge. "I know it's you, Mike," Patricia said, looking at Victoria. Tears began to fall from her eyes. "There's only one man who looks so sad and hurt by the world, and worse, hurt by those who once said they cared about him. His name isn't Joel, Miss Brown." Patricia spoke sharply. "I remember seeing you and him at the airport. You stood right there scolding me. You told me to find a way to talk to my brother while you were just waiting for him. Tell me," Patricia said, stepping closer, her anger clear. "Did you feel good putting me down while using my brother? Or are you just desperate to blame an innocent man?" If she had hit her, I knew my sister would have had a mark on her face for days. My wife was quick, even though she was pregnant. If I hadn't grabbed her arm, my sister would have felt her full strength. My reaction to Victoria's movement brought me back to reality. "Patricia," I said fiercely, "you have no right to talk about my wife like that." When I said her name, everyone gasped. Patricia stepped back in surprise. "Joel," Victoria said softly, trying to calm me down. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, patting her hand. I looked at my family and then pointed at my wife, glaring at them. "This woman has done more for me than all of you ever did to hurt me. You can't insult her. Even before I was accused, she believed I had done nothing wrong. Do you know why?" No one replied. They just stared at me. "Because she asked," I said sharply, letting my emotions out. My family seemed to pull away even more. "Not one of you bothered to ask if I did what they said I did," I snarled, anger showing on my face. "You all jumped on the hate train against me, and it still wasn't enough." I noticed them looking at their hands nervously. The men looked away, their shame clear from the hurtful things they had said about me. They had given interviews saying how terrible I was. Not one of you stopped to ask before the charges. You had already judged me, deciding it didn't matter what I did or didn't do. You got caught up in the chaos, and now you want to blame the woman who tried to help me. She worked for months going through proof that could have easily sent me to prison. She believed I might be innocent because she took the time to see me and ask questions. I was breathing hard now. No one moved. The last words I said to my family echoed in my mind, filled with anger and sadness. I remembered saying my life was good. I loved my family, had a decent job, a caring wife, and respect at work. I felt Victoria link her arm through mine, but she knew I wasn't done talking. I had kept my feelings inside for years. It was time to let them out. I noticed Terrence, Constance, and the people at the bus stop watching us. But when I needed strength, loyalty, and love the most, I found out it was not there. My devoted wife was with my friend and my kids. After hurting me, she asked me to let this man be in their lives, not because I had done anything wrong, but because my own family wanted it that way. "Did you think I killed those girls? Did any of you ever try to talk to their parents?" Everyone looked away. "I did," I said suddenly, feeling the weight of their gazes. Every single day I wrote letters to Tina and Maisie's parents. It was the only time I found peace when the guards left me alone. People thought I wrote out of regret, but they were wrong. I wrote about the love those girls had for their families. Tears began to roll down my face. I would have taken years of harsh words and mistreatment if it meant giving those girls back to their parents. I am a broken man, not just because of two cruel murderers, but because the family I thought would support me turned against me and hurt me with everything they had. Instead of asking what really happened, I sank to the ground, my words turning into cries. Victoria tried to hold on to me as I fell apart. I didn't notice, but 5 security guards stood around us, keeping my family back. Terrence stood in front of them, insisting they needed to go. Mary and Garland held each other and cried as they listened to me. As my thoughts raced, I fell into a nightmare I hadn't had in years. I kept walking into dark places, seeing the girls in awful situations while the Turner brothers laughed and made fun of me. The police and my family seemed to take pleasure in my pain, arresting me again and again. I couldn't wake from this terrible dream. When the ambulance arrived, I was shaking all over. I didn't feel the shot that eased my pain or see my family breaking down when they realized what happened to me. Victoria was there. I rode with Mike to the hospital. Even though I felt the twins moving in my belly, I held his hand the whole night. Even with the medicine, he was still in pain. He had been through a lot over the years, but this time the fight with his family really took a toll on him in a way he didn't understand. I knew Mike would be okay. He had to be, and I needed him. I couldn't imagine life without him or our twins growing up without their dad. As the sun rose, I felt someone holding my hand. I looked at Mike. He had a sad smile. "Are you okay?" he asked in a tired voice. I realized he was awake too. I pushed the nurse call button just like I was supposed to. "Mike, you're awake," I said, and he nodded. "Sorry, Vicky. I don't know what happened. One minute, Patricia was saying hurtful things, and then I woke up here," he said, sounding confused. Before I could say anything else, a doctor and a nurse entered the room to check on Mike. If everything looked good, he could go home that afternoon. For the next hour, Mike and I talked about what had happened. He was surprised by how he had shut down, even more than how he reacted to his family. Then he sighed. "I guess I'm not as over everything as I thought," he said, deep in thought. I paused for a moment, feeling a small kick from one of the twins. At least it wasn't pushing on my bladder. I got up and sat on the bed next to Mike. Soon I was leaning on him, his arm around me for support. "I'm not sure, Mike," I said while we both looked out the window at the hospital garden. "You went through something really tough. Yes, others have faced worse, but you were hurt by people you cared about for a long time. It's normal that you felt shut down when seeing them again. If this happens again," I said, looking into his eyes, "you need to find a way to stay calm. I think that would help a lot." As the morning went on, Terrence, Constance, Mary, and Garland came to visit. They were happy to see Mike was better. Constance and Mary loved feeling the twins' kick. We decided they would visit us for a small baby shower. My mother and Sylvia would join, and the charity meeting was pushed back a few weeks. Everyone agreed that Mike and I could join the meeting via video call instead of flying again. In the afternoon, when Mike was ready, Terrence drove us to the airport. We took a private flight home. Mike slept almost the whole way and most of the next day. I would have worried, but the doctor said he would be tired for about a week or two. I felt better knowing that when he was awake, he was alert and hungry. The baby shower went perfectly. My friends filled our home and we had a wonderful afternoon playing games, opening gifts, and sharing stories about parenting. I was surprised by some of the stories, even though I thought I knew what to expect. "Just leave your dignity at the door and Mike will help you get it back when you leave," Constance joked about giving birth. Mike, Terrence, Garland, and Doug went on a deep-sea fishing trip for the day. When they returned, Mike was very proud of the red emperor fish he caught, which was nearly 4 feet long. Overall, we had a great weekend. I was amazed that after everything that happened in Perth, I had never seen Mike so happy to be around others. After everyone left on Sunday evening, Mike and I sat on the porch. I noticed he was crying. "Are you okay, honey?" I asked. He nodded and smiled, though his tears were still on his cheeks. "Yes, Vic. It's been a long time since I felt this happy." "It's okay," he said, laughing a little. "This weekend with everyone has been great. If you had asked me 2 years ago if I would ever be happy again, I would have said you were dreaming. Now I have a wonderful wife who is about to give us 2 little miracles. I have friends who visit and spend time with me. I have a nice place by the beach and I'm feeling better than ever. It just feels good." He leaned back and relaxed. That night we went to bed even though I felt big and round. Mike was so sweet and gentle with me, and we shared a lovely moment that felt special. I had been through the births of 3 children before, so I thought I was ready for this. When Victoria's water broke at 2 a.m. on Thursday, I grabbed the bag we packed for the hospital, my keys, and hurried to the car. Then I realized I almost forgot my wife, so I rushed back inside to help her to the car. I don't think we were very fast on the way to the hospital, but I sure tried in our Jeep. It took just over an hour to get to Bundaberg Hospital, and by the time we arrived, Victoria was having strong contractions. A nurse met us at the entrance, and they quickly took Victoria inside. After a quick checkup, the doctor said we should have a C-section to keep the babies safe. Victoria and I had talked about this before, so we agreed right away. I kissed my wife as they prepared her for the operation. My other kids were born naturally, so this was new for me. Sometimes fathers can stand by a curtain in the operating room, but since it was early morning and the room was busy, I had to wait outside. A little over an hour later, I was waiting alone when Doug and Sylvia arrived. They looked a bit tired, but much calmer than I felt. I received hugs from both and we sat down. I told them that Victoria was still in surgery. They could see I was nervous, so they talked to help keep me calm. About 20 minutes later, as the sun began to rise, a nurse came out of the operating room. "Mr. Masters," she said, pausing when she saw Doug and Sylvia with me. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor." "It's okay. We're close friends of Joel and Victoria," Doug replied, mentioning my other identity. The nurse nodded and turned her attention back to me. "Sorry, Mr. Masters. I just came to let you know that your wife and the twins are doing very well. Your wife will be in surgery a little longer, but your daughters will be brought out to see you soon." "Daughters?" I whispered, hardly believing what I heard. "Yes. the nurse said with a smile. "You have two lovely twin girls." Hearing this made me sink to the ground in shock. Doug looked at me and Sylvia understood right away. She hugged me and smiled. "They are a blessing, Mike. You have two beautiful daughters." "Be proud," she said. A few minutes later, two nurses brought my daughters to me. I held them for the first time. I had forgotten how small they were. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I couldn't stop smiling. I felt so proud. After asking about Victoria for the 5th time in just a few minutes, one of the doctors came out with a smile. She asked if I wanted to take my girls to see their mother in recovery. The nurses pushed my daughters in their small carts through some hallways until we reached a private room. I invited Doug and Sylvia to join us. A nurse looked at us with a slight frown but didn't say anything. "Hey," I said softly as we entered the room. Victoria looked a bit sleepy but smiled when she saw me. "Hey," my wife replied quietly. I could see she was tired. The nurse handed me one of the girls and I gently placed her in Victoria's left arm. Then I did the same with our other daughter on the right. I looked closely at them. While they were very similar, I could see they were not exactly the same. "Do you know their names?" Sylvia asked, standing at the foot of the bed taking photos. I carefully sat on the edge of the bed next to Victoria and placed my hand on hers. My wife looked into my eyes and nodded. I leaned in and kissed the girl on my left, saying the name Tina. I heard both Doug and Sylvia gasp when they heard the name. I moved around the bed, being careful not to disturb Victoria, and kissed my second daughter, Maisie. I heard a sob. Sylvia was crying. She understood how much the names meant to us. Victoria and I chose not to learn the sex of our twins before they were born, but we had talked about names in case they were girls. We quietly asked Garland and Mary if we could honor their daughters if it came to that. A few minutes later, we sent photos of Victoria holding Tina and Maisie. We received a quick reply saying how proud they were. Later that morning, we had a very emotional video call. We asked Garland and Mary to be the twins' godparents. They accepted with tears and smiles. As the girls grew, our family grew too. Victoria, who once worried about being a mother, took to it naturally. She was perfect, balancing being gentle and firm. She always made time for me. If anything, our bond grew stronger. Once Victoria got the all clear from the doctor, our girls were 3 years old when I had a dream. At first, it felt like all the other times I had been there. However, this time was different. I found myself in the same clearing, but instead of feeling sad, it was bright and magical. The place was filled with strong, bright moonlight, lighting everything up around me. In the center was a large iron table painted bright white, sparkling in the moonlight. Around the table were several matching chairs instead of the dirt and twigs I remembered from before. The ground was now covered in soft green grass and little white flowers, making the place feel calm and welcoming. It was a great spot to relax and enjoy the moment. I stepped forward carefully, feeling the cool grass under my feet. I looked down at myself. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, just like I usually did now, not my old work clothes. I walked closer to the table, hoping to find something there, but I didn't see anyone at all. I walked around the table a couple of times, touching the cool metal and wondering what was happening. This dream felt very different from my others. "Hi, Mr. Mike," I heard a familiar voice say. I turned around and saw them, Tina and Maisie. They stood in front of me holding hands, looking so different from the way I remembered. They wore pretty white dresses, had white ribbons in their hair, and big smiles on their faces. I dropped to my knees and opened my arms wide. The sisters stepped in without a second thought and hugged me tightly. I felt their warm tears on my chest, and I knew they could feel mine too. The hugs seemed to last for a long time. Maybe hours passed. In this dream, time felt strange. All I knew was that I wanted this moment to last forever. "Hi, girls," I finally said after we broke the hug, leaning back to look at them. They smiled back at me, and I could see the love in their eyes. "You did so well, Mr. Mike," Macy said. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked the young girl, who would be starting high school now if she were still here. "You never gave up," she said, gently touching my face. "You never let them win." I looked at her for a moment, then glanced at Tina, who nodded in agreement. "Even when you were hurting and wanted it to stop, you kept fighting." "We're proud of you, Mr. Mike," Tina said. I felt a little funny and teased. "I feel like there's a but coming." The sisters both laughed and pulled me by the hand to sit at the table. "Yes, but this time the but is for you," Tina said. "For me?" I asked. Both girls nodded. "Yes, Mr. Mike," Macy said. "It's time for you to forgive yourself and really move on." Suddenly, I felt a shadow pass over the clearing, but quickly the moonlight shone brightly again. I felt the sisters' hands in mine. "It's all right, Mr. Mike," Tina said. "You have many people who love you now." Maisie nodded her head in agreement. "That's right," said a voice behind me. I turned and saw Victoria and my 3-year-old daughters. I dropped to my knees again as my twins ran into my arms, just like the sisters had before in my dream. "Daddy!" they squealed with joy. I hugged and kissed them as if I hadn't seen them in weeks. Even though I had only said goodnight a few hours before, I held them close and felt Victoria's hand on my shoulder as I turned back toward the bus stop. Sisters. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I wanted to connect my past with my future. "Tina and Maisie, I want you to meet these brave girls who are named after you," I said, introducing the 4 of them. They hugged like old friends, making me smile through my tears. "Tina and Maisie, I want you to meet my wife," I said. "Victoria," Tina said with a big smile. "Thanks for looking after him." Victoria smiled back and knelt down to hug the girls. Then she leaned in and gave me a gentle kiss. "Love you," she whispered. When we turned, the table was suddenly filled with a lovely picnic. It was perfect for a birthday party. There was fairy bread, custard tarts, and jars of goodies. We enjoyed everything for what felt like hours. The 6 of us laughed and joked. I kept smiling, feeling lighter than I had since that tough night. We played games that seemed to come out of nowhere, danced to music that felt magical, and shared funny stories. But soon, it was time to say goodbye. We hugged tightly, with plenty of happy tears. The bus staff sister hugged me really hard and surprised me with little kisses, calling me Dad, which made me cry even more. As the scene faded, I promised myself to wake up and remember this dream forever. When I opened my eyes, I saw my wife's face, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her hand gently touched my face, and I felt her warm tears fall on me. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," I replied softly as we hugged tightly. Just then, the twins burst into the room, both excited to tell us about the incredible dream they had. "Daddy, you were there!" "And Mom, too little," Tina said while her sister nodded in agreement. "Were there 2? Maisie asked, eager to share. They told us about the midnight picnic, the fun games, and how wonderful it all was. As the girls described the dream just like I had seen it, Victoria and I exchanged surprised looks. It was just a dream, right? But I knew the old nightmare of finding the way to my sister's heart was gone for good. It wouldn't bother me again. After that night, Mike and I often talked about the dream. It was hard to calm the girls down afterward. They even shared the story with Garland and Mary during their visit, and we all told it too. More tears were shed, especially when Garland and Mary announced they were expecting, and everyone ended up dancing to silly songs that afternoon. I watched Mike's face light up, knowing he was thinking about the same thing, the sisters dancing under the moonlight. That dream changed me forever. Meeting the girls like that deeply affected all of us. I know it changed me, but it changed Mike even more and in a good way. His worries felt much farther away, and the man I loved seemed even happier, making me fall in love with him even more, if that was possible. One summer evening, a few months later, he sat down on the deck with a frown on his face. It was the first time I had seen him look worried since that night. He held a letter in his hands, making me feel anxious as he looked at me. "Are you okay, honey?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah." He let out a sigh, looking out at the fading light over the ocean. The sound of waves crashing on the shore filled the air. He fiddled with the letter in his hands. "I want you to look at something, hun," he said, his voice heavy with hesitation. "I think it's time to reach out to my kids." He stopped and winced at his own words. I gave him a warm smile. I had never pushed him to connect with his family again. Honestly, if Mike never talked to them again, I would be fine with that. Of everyone who hurt him, his family had caused the most pain. For a few moments, I watched him play with the paper. It looked like a handwritten letter, and I guessed it was for his children. "Hun," I said softly, bringing his focus back to me. His family wasn't a forbidden topic, but we both knew it was sensitive. After his breakdown in Perth years ago, we learned to be careful. "Do you want me to read it?" I asked, pointing to the letter. He nodded and slid it over to me. "Yeah," Mike said. "It's just for the kids. After the dream, I think I can talk to them again. I'd like you to read it before I ask Terrence to deliver it." He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I have to believe their mother and those around them had an impact on them," he added quietly. "Mike," I said gently, and he looked at me. "I believe you are partly right. They were influenced, but they were not completely innocent. Would you like to stay here while I read it? Or would you prefer if I read it alone?" I understood his hesitation. He leaned down to kiss me and said, "I love you. I think I need to be here while you read it." "Okay, hun," I replied and picked up the letter. Mike's handwriting wasn't the neatest, but I could read it. Over the years, I noticed that his writing had actually improved since we met. I knew he kept a journal, writing in it at least once a week. He wrote a lot and had many books in his office. He often told me I could read them if I wanted to. Writing helped him express his feelings. I looked at him and smiled, then focused on the letter my husband had written to his children. "Leo, John, Matilda, I hope this letter finds you all well. I know it has been several years, and now you are adults with your own families. Knowing you have families makes me smile when I think about my life before. It has taken me a long time to feel ready to talk to all of you. Please understand that I struggled for a long time with what happened, and how you, your mother, your grandpa, your aunts, uncles, and others treated me. You all hurt me deeply, and I found it hard to think about any of you for too long. When you saw Victoria and me in the city a few years ago, I know you wanted to say sorry, but as you saw, I was still upset and not ready to talk. I am in a better place now, and I think it's time to begin communicating. I want you to know that I will only talk to the three of you, and it has to be on my terms. It will take time, and I need you to respect that. I do not want to talk to anyone else in your family. Please let them know this is my choice. If any of you try to go around me, I will stop talking to all three of you right away. The only reason I am reaching out is that I believe you, as my children, were affected by everything that happened around you during that time. If you weren't my children, I wouldn't be writing this letter. I still feel hurt about what happened, but I'm willing to start talking, which could lead to more. You should know that Victoria and I are married now, and we have twin girls. Maybe one day they can meet you, but for now, I want to keep them away from the past until Victoria and I think they can understand. For now, I ask that you reply with letters. You can write together or separately. That's up to you. But please take your time. I will need a lot of it. With hope and caution, your father, Mike. I finished reading the letter and saw how hard he tried to find the right words. I don't think I could have done better if I were in Mike's position. Writing to your kids after so long about how much they hurt you is really hard. "It's a good letter, honey," I said. "It gets to the point and shows them how you feel." Mike nodded. The next day, he sent the letter with Terrence to pass it on to his kids. Mike then started to write letters to each of them by hand. He asked me to read what he wrote, almost like he wanted me to agree that he was doing the right thing. I never tried to change his words, but always supported him. A few months later, Mike began emailing them, and in return, his kids sent him pictures of their lives. Mike cried the first time he saw a photo of Leo with his wife and kids after more than a year. They went from letters to emails, then to phone and video calls. Almost a year later, when the girls were close to turning 5, Mike agreed to meet them. As we walked to the tavern, my hands were shaking. Victoria held my right hand and Tina held my left. Maisie held her mom's hand on the other side. It took a long time to arrange this meeting. Ever since I sent my letter, the kids hinted they wanted to meet, but they never pushed for it. After months, I finally felt ready to see them in person. Victoria was more supportive than ever. She kept telling me she loved me and that everything would be okay. I knew that in my mind, but my heart was full of mixed feelings, hope and love, anger and hurt. My mind kept going back to when Matilda once threw paint at me. When we entered the tavern, I saw Terrence, Constance, Mary, and Garland sitting at a table. They waved at me and silently wished me luck. I looked over at a large group of tables across the room. As we got closer, they all stood up. Their faces showed a mix of fear and hope. Even though I had seen them on video calls, I still felt nervous, and I could tell they did too. "Hi," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "Dad?" Matilda replied softly. I opened my arms, and suddenly my oldest daughter was crying on my shirt. Soon after, my sons joined us, and the four of us stood together, a bundle of feelings, while everyone else watched. After a few minutes, we broke apart, wiped our tears, and sat down at the table. I was meeting my children's partners and my 3 grandkids for the first time. Before long, Terrence, Constance, Garland, and Mary joined us. We spent the afternoon sharing light stories about everyday things. It was nice to catch up. Except for one small talk, none of us wanted to dig too deep, and I was okay with that. The only awkward moment came when Matilda and her husband Rory shared that they were going to have a baby. "We wanted you to be the first to know, Dad," she said. "No one else knew until now, not even Mom." "Maddie," I answered, "it's fine. Just because I want to distance myself from your mother doesn't mean you should hide things from her." My daughter looked upset after I said that. Leo quickly spoke up. "Sorry, Dad," Leo said, looking sad. "We weren't going to say anything because we thought you wouldn't want to hear it. But none of us have seen Mom in over 3 years." I was shocked and my eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I asked. Both Leo and John shook their heads and Matilda looked down. "Dad," John said quietly, "the last time we talked to Mom was after you and I had that talk, when you were upset. She's still with that guy, Stephen, and they both still look down on you." "Mike," I finished for him since he couldn't say the name. They all nodded sadly. They knew I was wrongly accused, but they kept putting me down to feel better about their own choices. John added, "This is something we wanted to wait to talk about." I opened my mouth to speak but stopped. I felt panic rising inside me. I could feel Victoria squeeze my hand, while Constance and Mary looked at me with concern. I glanced over at the kids' play area and saw my girls happily playing with their cousins. It was something I never thought I would see a year ago. "It's okay," I said with a sigh. "We need to talk about this sooner or later. I can't keep acting like I might break when I hear about my past." I looked at my 3 oldest children. "I don't need to know everything. But why 3 years?" I asked quietly, unsure of my own voice. I glanced at Victoria, and she gave me a small nod, holding my hand tightly. Leo took a deep breath and said, "As the oldest, Dad, even before you were proven innocent, Maddie, Leo and I felt terrible. We regretted what we did no matter what happened. You raised us better than that." He spoke with sadness in his voice. "When your letters came from prison, Mom and Stephen never let us read them. They sent them back and always said bad things about you, calling you names even after you were proven innocent. We were so happy because we thought we could finally say we were sorry. Of course, we knew life would be hard. Even as teens, we realized that some of our choices weren't good, but we thought we could always apologize." He paused, and then Matilda began to speak. "We never thought you would shut us out completely," Matilda said, trying not to cry. "We knew you would be hurt, but we were your kids. We thought you would want to yell at us or at least tell us how upset you were, like we did to you. As time went on, we felt more lost, and Mom and Stephen seemed angrier. My oldest daughter shared that when Aunt Patricia returned from the airport that day after seeing Victoria, Mom really lost her temper. That was when we realized that Mom and Stephen weren't as innocent as they pretended to be. They had been hiding the truth." I nodded, and Leo went on. "About a month before we finally saw you, the truth came out. Maddie tried sending another letter with Terrence, my son, who nodded toward my lawyer. That was when we learned Mom and Stephen had been involved for months before everything fell apart. We teamed up with Grandma and Grandpa, Aunt Patty, and Uncle Clayton. We figured out you would be at the board meeting for your charity. We thought that was our best chance to see you." "We're really sorry, Dad," Matilda said, her eyes full of tears. I waved my hand, needing a moment to take it all in. We confronted Mom again, and Leo told us that she and Stephen kept saying how weak you were, saying you couldn't handle a simple talk after everything that had happened. We ended up arguing with them and walked away, telling them that if they didn't stop speaking badly about you, we would cut them out of our lives. Leo finished with. And that was 3 years ago. I asked all three of them, nodding. I've talked to Mom maybe 6 times since then, Matilda said. There hasn't been a real apology, so we haven't seen either of them. I felt at a loss for words, so I said the simplest thing. I'm sorry. All three of them, along with their partners and the other adults at the table, chuckled softly. Sorry? John's wife, Jenny, said. Mike, out of everyone here, given all the trouble my husband and his family caused you, you don't need to apologize. A sense of agreement filled the table. Leo's wife, Gertrude, added, Don't feel so bad, Mike. I agree with Jenny. You have nothing to feel sorry about, and we don't want you to feel bad for what Sandra has done to you. She paused, glancing at Victoria with a smile. And even though we're still getting to know you, Mike, the way Victoria looks at you makes me a little envious. I love my husband, but my feelings seem small compared to the way your wife looks at you. Her heart and spirit belong to you. If someone like Sandra could betray you at the first chance, then she shouldn't be around her grandchildren. Mike Rory, Matilda's husband, said that when he found out Maddie was Matilda, he almost ended things with her. I saw Gertrude and Jenny nod. They had similar stories, and things with Sandra and Stephen have been tough. Rory added, with more nods from the group, that your family has wanted to make up with you for a long time. Maddie has been really upset this past week, and I know it's not just because she's pregnant. This has been the main topic in almost every talk we've had with your kids. Jen, Gerda, and I have been through a lot, and we're not sad at all to be away from Sandra. But we are really happy to be here with you and Victoria right now. I felt Victoria lean on me, sharing her support. Thank you, I said, feeling heavy inside. Honestly, I never thought I would be in this place. I never thought I could be here. I'm sorry if my words came at the wrong time. I meant it less as pity for them and more about losing our connection. I know what it's like to lose important relationships. The rest of the afternoon went well, and by the time we left, much of my anger towards my kids had faded. We all promised to meet again soon and to keep talking through our problems. We understood we still had a long way to go, and the kids knew they were the only ones getting any forgiveness right now. Later that night, Victoria and I put our excited but very tired twin girls to bed. I found her on the hotel balcony with a glass of juice. Knowing this was her place to think, I poured a glass for myself and joined her. What's on your mind? I asked my wife. For a moment, Victoria didn't say anything. She just looked at the passing cars. Just when I was about to ask if she could hear me, she spoke softly. Mike, you know that I love you more than anything, right? She asked. I paused before answering. Yes. And you know I would never do anything to hurt you or bring back old pain, right? She said, turning to face me. Yes, I replied, unsure of where this was going. Well, she said, today I felt like I saw a new side of you. Watching you with Leo, John, and Matilda made me really happy for you. I was thinking, what is it, dear? Just say what's on your mind, I encouraged her gently. I'd like to invite them all to our home for Christmas, she said quickly. She thought it would be tough for me, but I just laughed. She looked at me, waiting to see my reaction. I smiled. It's okay, my dear wife. I was thinking the same thing. Let's ask Terrence to keep our address private. I don't want anyone else to know where we live. All right, she said. If you've never experienced a Christmas by the beach in Queensland, you've missed out. Sure, I replied with a grin. People often talk about the cozy feeling of drinking eggnog by the fire, but let's picture a sunny, warm day where you and your family can walk to the beach and put up a gazebo. We set up 3 gazebos while watching the kids run and play in the waves. The grown-ups enjoyed their drinks and ate platters full of shrimp, cold meats, mangoes, salads, and delicious Christmas cheesecakes. And the pavlova was truly amazing. You haven't fully enjoyed life until you've experienced this. It reminded me of the first time I met Leo, John, and Matilda several months ago in Perth. Our get-together felt a bit awkward at first. Their partners were surprised by how beautiful the place was, and the kids filled the air with laughter right after we arrived. My twin daughters led their cousins in a fun game of chase. We decided to call them cousins because of how close their ages were. I showed them around the house, the trampoline, the tree house, and everything else. That afternoon was all about our families being together. After grabbing some drinks, we all walked down to the beach. "Dad?" Matilda asked. We walked on the solid sand toward the water as the waves sometimes splashed over our feet. The kids got soaked when they accidentally fell down as the waves hit them. The beach curved gently, and a soft mist from the ocean spray reflected the afternoon sun. I was distracted by a line of cargo ships moving toward the port. I looked at my oldest daughter, and she looked sad. "So many years lost," she said quietly. I knew we had talked about this before, but she continued, "Dad, I'm really sorry." I thought about stepping in, wanting to reconnect, but Matilda squeezed my hand to stop me. "No, Dad, I really need to say this," she said. I paused for a moment and nodded. "I'm sorry, Dad. I regret that none of us were there for you when you needed us. I'm sorry that our selfishness pushed us apart. I'm sorry I wasn't the daughter you deserved. I truly mean it, Dad." This was more than just a simple sorry. Her words came from the heart. I could feel her sadness, regret, and pain. I understood her feelings well. "I'm glad you're here, Dad. This place is beautiful. Victoria is amazing," she said about my new partner and my baby on the way. She paused, and tears rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered after a moment as we kept walking. "For what?" I asked. "For letting me back into your life, Dad. Even after everything that happened, you welcomed me back. I know that it must have hurt a lot for you to do that after what I put you through. Thank you, Dad. My child will get to meet their grandfather and know the strongest man I've ever known." I smiled as Victoria lightly touched her growing belly. The girls and I had gone back to Perth twice in the last few months, and we spoke with my older kids every week. Most of our talks covered everyday things like the weather, jobs, and kids, but we also took time to share our feelings about the hard times we've been through. "If there's any place to heal," I said while looking at the beach, "this is it. Doug helped me find this place, and I've never looked back. Whenever I feel down, Victoria takes my hand and walks with me." I remember a time that made me smile. I was really sad about a man named Larry who hurt me in prison. When I mentioned Larry, Matilda frowned. But Victoria, walking ahead with the others, smiled at me. She saw Matilda's face, and I shook my head. Victoria kept walking, giving me a moment to talk with my daughter. "Let's just say Larry was not a friend," I said with a sad smile. "Our time together was awful, but I was surprised by how much I felt when I heard about his death. I didn't like him, but hearing he was gone hit me hard." Victoria knew all about Larry and took me for a walk. We walked for 2 hours without saying much, but she understood how to help me. "She really is amazing," Matilda said quietly. "You don't even know the half of it." I smiled. I meant what I said that day in Perth. Victoria has seen me at my worst. She knew I might never learn to love her back the way she loves me. But she loved me anyway. My heart belongs to her. I won't let anyone come between us. "I can see that, Dad. Mom was just practice for you. Victoria is connected to you in a special way that Brad and I hope to have one day. It might sound cheesy, but that woman would do anything to keep you safe." I thought about what Matilda said. Then I nodded and placed my hand on hers. "I know, Maddie," I replied, smiling as I looked at Victoria. She must have felt my gaze because she moved a little playfully. "Believe me, I know." The next day, on Christmas Eve, Terrence and Constance came with their 3 kids, and Mary and Garland brought their son Thomas. We all played beach cricket together, with everyone young and old joining in. Everyone laughed as Tina and Maisie teamed up and kept running with the bat, even when they were out. It was a little after midnight on Christmas Day when I woke up to my wife's gentle touch. "I know you're close, my love," she whispered softly. "Let's make this a special Christmas, even though we couldn't have more kids." Her words warmed my heart as we shared that joy. "I love you," she whispered, looking into my eyes. "I love you more," I replied. "I love you most," she joked back. "It's a tie," I said, making her smile. "Merry Christmas, Mike," she said, still close to me. After we tidied up, we fell back asleep in each other's arms on Christmas morning. We had many presents for everyone, especially for the kids who got new swimsuits and lots of beach toys. Matilda, with my okay, bought the twins bright pink and orange floral swimsuits. She even got the same swimsuits for herself and matching shorts for her brothers. To this day, I still have pictures of my 5 kids from that Christmas hanging on the wall. We enjoyed a feast with lots of food and drinks. We laughed as if everything was perfect. When Doug and Sylvia arrived, we set up our tents again and had a great afternoon at the beach. A week later, after my older kids and their families went home, I felt a surprising emptiness without them. As I sat on the porch thinking about it, Victoria put her arms around my neck and kissed me before sitting down beside me. "It's because you've forgiven them," she said softly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "That lonely feeling you have," she smiled. "It's because you've really forgiven them. We talk about this a lot, but over the past few months, as you've talked with them, I've seen you become happier. You've fixed the important relationships in your life. But remember, you will always have Tina, Maisie, and me with you." The next year felt pretty normal compared to the rest of my life. The girls went to school. Victoria had a little trouble that first week, even more than the twins. But we got through it. Victoria and I traveled a bit, and I visited my adult kids every few months. Oh, and Matilda had her baby. With my okay, Brad and she decided to call him Michael. I tried to tell them not to, but they insisted on calling him the bravest man they knew. I felt honored. My kids said that my parents and siblings were still asking to talk to me. They told them that if I ever wanted to chat, I would reach out. Sometimes they passed along messages, but they knew to keep some distance. I was starting to feel ready for a conversation, but unlike my kids, my family was old enough to choose how they reacted, even if they felt sorry. One day, Victoria and I sat at a cafe by the beach, enjoying coffee and cake. A group of locals was talking about the upcoming school fair this year. The kids wanted to set up a dunk tank, where parents and teachers would sit over a pool of water, and the kids could throw balls at a target to see who could get them wet. I had arranged to rent the dunk tank from down the Sunshine Coast, and we were discussing how my daughters wanted to try to dunk me when we suddenly heard loud shouting outside. "Where is he? I know he's in there!" I recognized that voice. I hadn't heard it in over 10 years, and I wished it could have been longer. "Come on out! Get out here!" shouted the woman's husband, who used to be my friend. I looked at Victoria and saw she was very upset. My phone rang. "Dad?" John's voice was filled with worry. "I just found out. Mom and Stephen." "Yeah," I replied. "They are already here." "Are you going to be okay, Dad?" my son asked. "We can't get over there until tomorrow at the earliest." "It'll be all right," I said, trying to calm him down. "Just know it wasn't us. We wouldn't do that." "I know, Dad," he said. "I know you wouldn't." Victoria and I walked outside with the other parents to see what was happening in front of the cafe. 2 local police officers were standing nearby and watching the 2 people causing trouble. "Ma'am, please stop yelling. There's no one named Mike here, and definitely no one called Murder Mike," Officer Casey said. "You're wrong, officer. We saw him go in there just half an hour ago. Look, that's him," Stephen said, pointing at me. "That's Murder Mike. He killed 2 little girls and went to prison." "I don't know who you mean, sir," Officer Jared, the second officer, replied. "The man you're pointing at is Joel Masters. He has lived in this community for many years. His twin daughters go to our local school. He and his wife are friends with the mayor, and he helps anyone in need." "You're lying!" my ex-wife shouted. "I know who my ex-husband is, and that's him. Michael, other. He's a killer." Watching this was strange. Usually I would feel scared and worried, but this time I felt calm, even a bit sorry for her. They argued with the police for a while without getting anywhere. I decided to step in. "Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Jared," I said as I stood between the officers. "But it seems like these 2 need to talk about what's bothering them." I looked at them and raised an eyebrow. "Why don't we go inside and have a quiet talk?" I suggested, emphasizing the word quiet. "If that's okay with you, Joel?" Casey asked, looking at me with interest. "Sure," I replied. "Let's have just Victoria and these 2 join us. Can I ask everyone else to give us some space while we sort this out?" I asked the crowd. People nodded, but Casey and Jared wanted to get coffee inside first. We sat back at the same table as before, with Victoria and me on one side and Sandra and Stephen on the other. "All right, you 2, Victoria said in a serious tone. "What do you want with my husband?" "He was my husband first," Sandra shot back angrily. "Hey!" Casey warned from the side. "Mind your language." Sandra ignored him. "He belonged to me first. Why would you want someone like him, given what he did?" She shook her head as if disgusted. First? Victoria asked in a sweet but firm voice. Who do you think my husband is? Sandra paused for a moment and replied, He's my mother. But if you're married to him now, you should already know. He looks a bit different, more muscular and tanned. But he is definitely the man I married and had 3 kids with. I took a sip of my coffee, which was now cold, but I could see Victoria was ready to handle this situation. Let's say for a moment you're right. Why would my Joel marry me with a different name? My wife asked. Stephen chuckled, and Sandra glared at me as if she was about to share a big secret. Because he killed 2 girls, she said, looking proud of her claim. Victoria frowned. You're talking about the murders from a few years ago. Tina and Maisie were killed by the Turner brothers, who are both in prison for life. Are you saying that my husband is Michael Other? The man had been wrongfully locked up. He suffered from hurt caused by his family and friends. While in prison, other inmates also hurt him. When he got out, he found out that his wife, who was my friend, had been unfaithful. She was with his close friend. This news made him realize he needed to change everything about his life and start anew. Is that who you're saying I'm married to? Victoria asked, her voice rising. That's right, Sandra replied, crossing her arms but not realizing how she affected the conversation. If my Joel is really the man you're talking about, then why would you leave him during his hardest times? You turned his kids and family against him, divorced him, and even sent him photos of you with another man. Victoria continued, You wrote him a letter saying you had been with that friend of his for a long time. You have gone to every talk show to talk badly about him, even when it wasn't true. If this man I care about, the one I'd do anything for, is the same man you're speaking of, then tell me why I should trust you around him. Victoria stood tall, her eyes fierce, breathing fast. Sandra glanced at Casey and Jared, who were smirking but not planning to defend her. With worry now on her face, Sandra looked back and forth between Victoria, Stephen, and me seeking help. What do you want, Sandra? Why are you upsetting my husband? Victoria asked firmly. Stephen seemed uneasy, but he turned to the officers and then to the table, resting a hand on his wife's arm. Money, he said plainly. Money? Victoria replied, her surprise softening her voice. We know Mike made a lot after he got out, and we want part of it, he explained simply. I leaned back, watching my wife still on edge, and chose to stay quiet. Why do you think you deserve anything? Victoria asked. Stephen shrugged and turned his gaze to me. Because we know who you are and can tell everyone where you are, he answered. He then looked directly at me, ignoring Victoria. Don't get us wrong, Mike. We don't like you, and you'll never be with your first love again. I couldn't help but chuckle. But we like a certain lifestyle, Stephen said. The money from the talk shows has run out. Since the kids have stopped talking to us, we thought they might want you back. So we looked through their trash and found this cafe's name. They come here every time they travel with you. I nodded, realizing they had indeed gone through the trash. How much do you want? I asked, knowing Victoria would give me a disapproving look for speaking up. $1 million, he replied. I repeated the question, ignoring Victoria's warning. Look, $4 million and you both act like you never saw me, like I don't exist anymore. Stephen smiled and Sandra seemed relieved. Yes, he said, nodding. I quietly replied, that's blackmail. Stephen looked over at Casey and Jared to see if they noticed us. Since we weren't shouting anymore, they probably missed our talk. He shrugged. I've done worse things to you. Who do you think paid the guards to let Big Larry take care of you? Or who helped Sandra write the letter you got? Who tricked Sandra into turning your family against you? I felt my patience slipping. He was trying to get a rise out of me. I know I did wrong, Mike, he carried on. But it's your word against mine. You're still a murderer, Mike, and nobody can prove anything. Just give us the money and we'll go away. Why? I asked him. He was once my friend. Even if I was the person you say I am, and even if I had that money, why would I give you so much? You have made more than that from the media. Why would I hand money to 2 blackmailers who would just come back for more? Tell me why. Victoria looked at me proudly. Over time, I learned to ask questions without giving in. Also, I said, pulling out my phone and turning it on to show I was recording, you just said I'm someone I'm not, which is breaking the law. You also tried to take money from me, which is another crime, and you just admitted on this recording that you paid some officers to act unfairly against someone who was innocent. Finally, I added, if I were the person you think I am, no news companies would work with you. I would have a contract with them. I would make sure there was a rule that if they talked about that person, they could be sued for much more than they would owe. That's if I were the Mike guy you're talking about. I looked at Sandra and Stephen, and they were unsure where to look. I turned off the recording and stood up. If that's everything, I think you both should head back to the airport and go home. There's nothing for you here, and even though it's warm now, it will be very cold for both of you. Without a word, they both got up and walked toward the door. As they reached the doorway, I called out to Stephen. "Stephen," I said, and when he turned around, I punched him hard on his jaw. He stumbled and fell to his knees as the crowd cheered. Casey and Jared just smiled. "That's for being dishonest and for taking another man's wife." "And you," I said, turning to Sandra, who looked shocked as she stared at her husband, now on his knees with a bleeding nose. "Just be thankful. My wife is very calm and fair. She helped your ex-husband out of trouble and gave him a reason to keep going. She was so calm that even though I could see the anger in her eyes, she wouldn't do anything because she was above that." Sandra's eyes grew wide when she recognized me, but she had no proof, and she knew she couldn't change anything. With a face that showed her age, Sandra nodded. "Goodbye, Mike," she said as she went to help Stephen stand up. She looked at the police and realized they wouldn't help them if they called me. She started to say something but paused. "You're not going to, are you?" she asked. I gave her a sad smile. "No, Sandra, I'll tell them. But you've burned your bridge with them just as they were trying to fix things with me. I doubt they will reach out to you again." I shrugged. "But maybe I'm wrong. I was once about you." She left with Stephen, and surprisingly, I never saw her again. I sat back down and Victoria hugged me. I was okay, apart from a little shake in my right hand. "I'm so proud of you, honey," she said as the crowd returned. Jared whispered to Casey, who nodded, and then he went after Sandra and Stephen. I turned to the group of about 20 people gathered around Victoria and me. "I guess everyone knows my secret now." Doreen, one of the older women, let out a rough but friendly laugh. "Joel, we've all known since almost the beginning." I looked at Doreen and then at the crowd. They all nodded in agreement. "But why?" I started to ask. "If you all knew." "Because you were a man who was hurting," Doreen said. "We knew who you were, and we talked about what to do when the mayor invited you. Some of us were nervous at first, but you kept to yourself and didn't come to town much in the beginning. The people you spoke to understood you needed time to heal, so we decided to give you space." I nodded, tears starting to form in my eyes. "A few reporters tried to find you early on too," Casey added. "When I moved here with the police, the community filled me in. We all agreed you needed protection, so we sent them away like we did with those two today." I nodded again. Tears ran down my cheeks, but I managed to smile. Doreen jumped in again. "Then we started seeing you more with your lovely wife and beautiful daughters. We decided you could just be Joel with us." She gave me a knowing look that older folks sometimes have. "You can be Mike too if you want, but we all care about you just as you are. You're a part of this community, both of you, and we take care of our own," she said with a nod. For the next hour, we chatted, sharing hugs and stories about the people who had tried to find me, including my brother Clayton coming to town. I thought about reaching out to him, but Victoria looked at me and shook her head. So I quickly dropped the idea, and she smiled at me. She realized now wasn't the right moment to open that door. The next month, the school fair was a huge success. I spent nearly half the day at the dunk tank and helped raise close to $1,000. Victoria was always nearby, ready with a towel and a sweet kiss. My daughters were so proud and called me the best dunking dad in the school. In an unexpected turn, Garland and Mary chose to move closer to us when the twins started high school. They felt that Victoria and I were like family to them, and with all the time we spent traveling, it seemed to make sense. They shared that when the twins were the same age as their own girls, they had a dream that closely resembled my family's story. We hugged and shed tears together, and they thanked me again for everything. You might wonder if I made amends with my parents and siblings. Well, sort of. When my father fell ill, I set my feelings aside and went to see him in the hospital. There were tears and many apologies from them. I received the same from my siblings. Patricia felt a mix of emotions. There had been too much pain, even with their apologies. My children were younger, and my love for them felt different. My parents and siblings had no real excuse, but after my father passed away, I continued to visit them about twice a year. It was strange, but usually Matilda came with me to help bridge the gap. As I got older, Victoria and I were invited to join the board of LRO, the investment company where we had put a lot of our money after I got out. We had spent a good amount of time with Robbie and Amy over the years. As I mentioned, they are distant relatives, and I haven't shared much about our time together since they have their own story. Being on the board was enjoyable as we chose investments that could really make a difference for people. My family means everything to me. I have experienced wonderful highs and painful lows, and without my loving family and friends, I honestly don't think I would have made it through. And then there's Victoria. She is still my rock. Her smile is always there when I see her, and I know that her eyes light up just for me. Her touch comforts me. Even as we grow older, I still feel a thrill when I'm near her. She helps me with our charities and investments, making our lives richer than I ever dreamed possible, all thanks to her. She keeps me grounded, and I can't picture a day without waking up next to her. Life is good. Victoria. Sadly, I have the last words to share in this story of loyalty and love. Today, we buried Mike at 86. He passed away peacefully in his sleep. The night before, we had a heartfelt moment together. Even after all these years, he still knew how to make me feel truly alive. Our kids and grandkids live nearby, and we even got to meet 3 great-grandchildren together. We feel blessed. Almost everyone in town came out for his funeral. I was surprised to see so many people whom my husband had helped over the years after he returned from prison. Sylvia and Constance live with me at the beach house since their husbands passed away a few years ago. They enjoy staying here with me and a small team that helps with our health and keeps things tidy. It's nicer than a retirement home, and together we often share laughs and tears as we remember our lost spouses. Every night I go to bed and cry because I miss my husband. I smile when I think of him. Even as I grow older, I still feel a bit playful. I remember the look he gave me before he held me close at that hotel long ago. I found a broken man, and I believe that giving him my love was the best gift for us both. I know I will see him again soon. This thought makes me smile as I brush my hair, clean my teeth, and crawl into bed feeling calm. My body has changed. My hips feel wider, and I notice small bruises from bumping into things that take longer to heal. But Mike still loves to hold me whenever he can. Tonight, as I drift off to sleep, I think about him with a smile. I find myself in a familiar place. It's bright with moonlight, and there's a large bench in the soft grass. Even though I am in the woods, I can hear the ocean like I'm right by our home. On the bench, I see 3 people. There is Mike, larger than life. He stands up and opens his arms, and I rush into them. On either side of him are 2 young women. They seem older than the last time I saw them in this place. These 2 have had a big impact on my life. "Welcome home, my love," Mike says as he holds me close. I kiss him, feeling happy, until I notice a tug on my sleeve. It's Tina, my daughter. Now she is a young woman with long, straight black hair and a warm smile. "Thank you for loving him and seeing his true strength," she says, hugging me with happy tears in her eyes. "You should know," her sister Maisie adds as she joins the hug. "Your choice to believe in him has changed lives. Not just Mike's, but many others are much happier because of you. Your trust in him is a moment that many will never understand." I feel amazed, and Mike looks at me with a smile. "So what now?" I ask. Mike's eyes shine brightly. "Anything we want." Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.